American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 726 to 750. The simulation ended once again. Primarch Rogel Dorn opened his tightly closed eyes and immediately looked at the wolf Rogel Dorn and Cypher Rogel Dorn sitting beside him. The two people opposite him also slowly opened their eyes, subconsciously exhaling a breath. Aha, finally back. Why does it feel like a long time has passed? Primarch, did you get anything good over there? Wolf Rogel Dorn, grinning, twisted his creaking, thick neck back and forth. He turned his gaze and looked curiously in the direction of Primarch Rogel Dorn, asking. You can say that again, this time they really are good things, except for the third reward, which is an enhancement surgery. The first reward is useless to Cypher and me, only you can use it. Primarch Rogel Dorn scanned the string of text labels on the simulator page while nodding in the direction of Wolf Rogel Dorn. The next second, one of his vibranium palms turned slightly, successfully extracting the first reward from it. This was a tesseract labyrinth the size of an adult fist, with faint green light faintly rising between its extremely smooth and flat six surfaces. Trazen's tesseract labyrinth, simple and quick to use, even a fool can learn it, and there is no danger of chaos corruption. It can be used to imprison star god fragments, and it can also be used to store a lot of things. Primarch Rogel Dorn squinted his eyes, raised the tesseract labyrinth in his vibranium palm, and repeatedly looked at it a few times. Without any hesitation, he gently tossed it towards Wolf Rogel Dorn. Wolf Rogel Dorn suddenly raised a thick arm and firmly grasped the tesseract labyrinth, faintly emitting a green glow, in his palm. Haha, that's great, I also have a means to store supplies now, hee, thanks to our Primarch, and thanks to the Emperor Her Old Majesty. At this moment, Wolf Rogel Dorn, who was excited, had not yet finished speaking. Primarch Rogel Dorn once again extracted the second reward. The string of rosary beads from a special friend was extracted from the simulator. He couldn't help but widen his eyes, carefully staring at this string of rosary beads with special significance. Even the movements of his thick fingers, wrapped in vibranium, seemed to soften a lot. But the next moment, Primarch Rogel Dorn, taking a deep breath, handed the rosary beads in his palm to Cypher Rogel Dorn without any hesitation. Brother, one for each of us, this is for you. However, at this time, Cypher Rogel Dorn, with a smile that was not a smile on his face, did not immediately reach out to take the rosary beads. Instead, he shook his head and said indifferently. In our hometown's words, a gentleman does not steal what others love. Do you think that I, a dignified fallen angel, the legendary Cypher Lord, would lack a personal defense item? Even if I can't temporarily get a super precious single-person void shield, I can still find a place to find a relic-level iron halo. Alright, my dear Primarch brother, you should put it away. This is a commemorative item of special significance to you and her. Speaking of which, the wolf cub is missing a string in his head and doesn't understand love between a man and a woman, with only battle and brotherhood in his heart. And I clearly know that I am just a clone split from the main body, a remnant on the timeline. What's the use of me snatching this thing from you? At worst, I still have Gormith's witch spirit to relieve my loneliness. At this moment, Cypher Rogel Dorn's voice had just fallen. Both Primarch Rogel Dorn and Wolf Rogel Dorn, who was playing with the Tesseract Labyrinth, focused their attention on Cypher Rogel Dorn. Tisk, Cypher, your taste is really heavy. Wolf Rogel Dorn, grinning, spat out softly. Primarch Rogel Dorn frowned slightly. He slowly wrapped the string of rosary beads repeatedly around a vibranium armor, and then earnestly asked Cypher Rogel Dorn. Cypher, has Slaanesh completely noticed you? As long as I am still alive, this is a matter of time. At least my aesthetic concept is subtly changing now, but don't worry, besides the Emperor, our plan won't allow my fun to go wrong. This is also a means of quenching thirst with poison, right? At this moment, Cypher Rogel Dorn's indifferent words temporarily plunged Primarch Rogel Dorn and Wolf Rogel Dorn into a state of silence. Perhaps one day, these brothers of theirs will have to deal with that old friend who unfortunately became a demon prince. Subsequently, Primarch Rogel Dorn, nodding slightly, took the lead in breaking the silence between the three, and he slowly said, "All right, I can be considered to know that each of you has unique skills, but let's talk about the future later. Next, it's time for my enhancement surgery. I hope it can increase some combat power." As soon as he finished speaking, Primarch Rogel Dorn, under the silent gaze of Cypher Rogel Dorn and Wolf Rogel Dorn, selected the third reward from the simulator. In an instant, as the simulator page quickly closed, Primarch Rogel Dorn could clearly sense that something was beginning to grow rapidly from scratch inside his tall body. Bang! Primarch Rogel Dorn, frowning tightly, abruptly drove the vibranium power armor to stand up from the chair with a bang. He could perceive that the strands of tough blood vessel networks that were constantly growing and spreading were covering all the organ tissues in his body. And as each organ tissue was connected by a denser network of tough blood vessels. An unprecedented, wonderful feeling that the power of all organ tissues was being gradually unified and activated completely occupied Primarch Rogel Dorn's mind. Rebute Gilliman's rationality. I don't think it's as good as saying it's the power of governance at the level of unifying the major body organ tissues. Cypher, quickly dismantle the power armor on my body. I vaguely feel that my height and size are about to increase rapidly. At this moment, Primarch Rogel Dorn, who couldn't help but widen his eyes, quickly shouted loudly to the two people around him. Cypher Rogel Dorn's reaction was naturally very swift. He then released a large number of servitors from the warp crystal, and began to help Primarch Rogel Dorn dismantle the vibranium power armor, Starlight Glory. Soon after, as Cypher Rogel Dorn and the servitors, with swift movements, constantly dismantled various armor components from Primarch Rogel Dorn's tall body. Primarch Rogel Dorn's bare height, which had been maintained at about 2 meters and 7 meters, seemed to break free from some kind of shackles, and gradually swelled up at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, what was completely presented in the field of vision of Wolf Rogel Dorn and Cypher Rogel Dorn was a strong giant whose height and size were maintained above 3 meters. Tisk, I have to say, now you finally have the basic height of a Primarch, my Primarch, big brother. Wolf Rogel Dorn, holding the Tesseract Labyrinth in a plasteel palm, scanned Primarch Rogel Dorn in front of him up and down. He grinned, revealing his snow-white fangs, and teased the other party with a hint of envy and jealousy in his tone. Inside the depths of the Fang, within a large training ground, Warwolf Lehman, clad in black artificer power armor, was engaged in an intense, experimental battle with Primaris Lehman, who stood 3 meters tall. Rumble rumble. Terrifying collision sounds, one after another, echoed through the surrounding air. At the edge of the training ground, the sons of Fenris, each instinctively widening their eyes, were watching the offensive movements between the two with bated breath. Pung pung pung. The ornate chainswords known as frost blades, their icy blue blades. The sharp teeth, each composed of Fenrisian sea monster fangs, interlocked and collided, erupting in a low, grating friction. Although the chainsword's internal chain motors were not activated, the sharp teeth, capable of tearing through ceramide armor with their pulling force, were still extremely dangerous. However, at this moment, Primaris Lehman, towering at 3 meters tall, was only wearing a set of specially sized scout armor. With an expressionless face, he was utilizing reaction speeds and physical strength far exceeding those of ordinary Astartes, engaging in an increasingly fierce battle with Warwolf Lehman, who was instinctively baring his fangs. Of course, neither side chose an aggressive, injury-for-injury fighting style. Instead, they were competing in weapon skills, relying on their respective combat experience and reaction speed. As time continued to pass, the Whispering Sons of Fenris seemed to observe that Primaris Lehman's stamina showed no signs of waning. Even his offensive footwork, shifting back and forth, and the way he wielded his melee weapons became increasingly agile and ingenious. If other Primarchs were present, they would certainly recognize that Primaris Lehman was using a certain combat technique that clearly leaned towards Fulgrim's style. Stop stop stop. At this moment, Warwolf Lehman, his eyelids twitching wildly, could only watch helplessly as a frost blade rapidly slashed towards his neck with an extremely tricky offensive angle. Even though he was wearing Artificer power armor at this moment, faced with Primaris Leman's far surpassing and fierce offensive, he still abruptly called a halt to the battle. I concede. I certainly can't beat you in a pure contest of weapon skills. Why don't we have a real, no-holds-barred fight? This isn't fully showcasing my true strength. Unable to help but widen his eyes, Warwolf Leman turned his gaze to the frost blade that was steadily stopped in front of his neck. He tilted his head slightly, complaining to Primaris Leman, who was much taller than him. Brother, I was just a little too excited about the great increase in combat power. To some extent, you should have won this sparring match. I already fouled just now. After the new enhancement surgery thoroughly integrated the various organs and tissues in my body, I clearly feel that both my reaction speed and physical strength have approached the limits of a Primarch, and are rapidly breaking through. I can even imitate and learn the combat skills of other Primarchs to a certain extent. A faint smile appeared on the corner of Primaris Leman's mouth as he slowly lowered the frost blade in his palm. He said to Warwolf Leman in a serious tone, "Of course, I also know that even true Primarchs are not invincible. Right now, I am just enjoying the slight joy of increased strength. After all, when we officially face those apocalyptic battlefields, the role that a mere Primarch can play is very limited. However, I do have a vague idea. There must still be all kinds of supernatural powers, or strange technological creations, or even magical artifacts that can be obtained in our homeworld. Even if we cannot taint the pure bloodline of humanity, if we find a more suitable way, then it will be enough to greatly enhance our individual combat capabilities." At this moment, as soon as Primaris Leman's voice fell, Warwolf Leman, who had raised a finger-tipped hand to scratch his chin, suddenly had a bright light in his eyes. He gazed thoughtfully at Primaris Leman's bronze face and said, "Brother, you know what, that's really a way. After all, unless Cypher Lord and I really defect to Chaos, our own strength increase has already reached some kind of limit. I can rely on the Emperor's protection to hack and kill Chaos or aliens to get some blessings for free, but Cypher's side is a bit difficult. Those two things that are constantly paying attention to him are not good things." However, at this moment, Primaris Leman suddenly raised a palm and gently patted Warwolf Leman's shoulder armor. He said to Warwolf Leman with earnest words, "Remember that old saying, when you gaze into the abyss is also gazing into you. You don't really think that even under the protection of the Emperor, accepting blessings from the Chaos Gods will have no consequences, do you? Once you, because of various reasons or the traps set by Chaos, actively raise the idea of pursuing power itself, then you will inevitably be completely corrupted by Chaos. Brother, in my subsequent plans, I will try to choose some action missions with suitable timelines to see if I can get complete Primaris technology from the prayer support. After you successfully cross the Primaris boundary, it should be able to greatly enhance your respective combat power, so don't be too obsessed with this. I will also tell Iron Man David to start collecting and searching for some methods and artifact tools that can obtain native power. To be honest, I don't want to personally execute you brothers one day, do you understand?" At this moment, Primaris Leman's completely heartfelt words caused Warwolf Leman to fall into a state of complete silence. After a long time, his expressionless expression seemed to return to that carefree appearance, grinning and smiling at Primaris Leman. "Primarch, if one day we are really unfortunate enough to fall and be corrupted, don't show mercy to us, one word, kill." Warwolf Leman's low voice echoed in Primaris Leman's ears. And Primaris Leman did not speak, but nodded his head heavily with an expressionless face. In the next period of time, the two people seemed to deliberately avoid this topic, which was also extremely heavy for them, and instead discussed other things. Dong dong dong. Just at this moment, Cypher Leman, still wearing a white hood on his tall body carrying a bandaged greatsword, driving dark green power armor, greeted the sons of Fenris around the training ground at will, while quickly moving his steps into the interior of the training ground. "Brothers, now there is good news and bad news, which one do you want to hear first?" Cypher Lehman stood next to the other two people and asked in a calm tone. Good news. Warwolf Lehman, shaking his gray-white long hair slightly, turned his head and asked. The good news is something related to our Primarch. Your vibranium power armor is being redesigned and forged with all efforts by the forging masters inside the Fang, and before it is completely out of the oven, Bjorn the Fell-Handed intends to give you a set of spare armor and weapons belonging to the Wolf King himself. Then, what's the bad news? Primaris Lehman, raising his eyebrows subconsciously, continued to ask. When we just landed on Fenris, we subconsciously thought that the timeline was wrong. The current timeline is not after the opening of the Great Rift. The correct timeline now is the end of the 41st millennium, at least decades away from our timeline. Next, Primarch Roche and Wolf Roche also joined Cypher Roche in discussing the timeline issue. In the end, they temporarily came up with a few solutions. One option was to use the descending characteristic of prayer support. Wait until the mission is successfully completed and the warp gate is reopened for their return. They could try praying to the Emperor to reset the warp gate to the correct timeline. Or they could simply choose a prayer support with a similar time node, directly contact the Primarch fleet via psychic communication to pick them up, instead of choosing to return. The second method was to try opening a portal to their homeworld with the assistance of the Rune Priests, the Space Wolves psychic unit, and then return to the Primarch fleet by detouring. And if all of the above attempts failed, then Roche and the others had one last, clumsy solution. That was to honestly lead the Space Wolves in battle for decades. Once the three of them lived to a suitable time node, they would contact the Primarch fleet to pick them up. After all, a mere few decades is just a blink of an eye for any Astartes, as long as they don't die in battle. However, before Primarch Roche planned to make his first attempt, he still had to go and meet with Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Inside the brightly lit Great Hall of the Fang, the massive dreadnought Bjorn the Fell-Handed was surrounded by more than a dozen iron priests, silently awaiting the arrival of Primarch Roche. Soon after, Primarch Roche, standing approximately 3 meters tall and wearing oversized scout armor, stepped into the hall. More than a dozen iron priests quickly stepped forward and bowed to Primarch Roche. Primarch Roche nodded to the crowd and then approached Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Primarch, I heard that your power armor doesn't fit very well. Although I know that the young pups who are skilled in forging or recrafting a set of Primarch-level power armor for you, the time it takes is also a big problem. Therefore, I plan to give you a spare set of armor that once belonged to the Wolf King. Bjorn the Fell-Handed gently waved his massive power claw and said to Primarch Roche in a muffled voice. Primarch Roche thanked Bjorn the Fell-Handed and the Space Wolves, and did not refuse their kindness. Rumbling. At this moment, more than a dozen iron priests worked together to slowly push a large metal container, shrouded in black wolf pelts, into the Great Hall of the Fang. Primarch, the power armor of the Wolf King is called Frostfang. As far as I know, it is equipped with a special device from the Dark Age of technology called a heat sink field generator, which can quickly absorb the surrounding heat when activated, creating a large and deadly zone of frost around the Primarch. Of course, Frostfang also represents the harshness and coldness of Fenris in a sense. As for this set of spare armor, named Volcano's Ring by the original master craftsman, it represents the other side of Fenris, the endless scorching volcanoes and the tenacious vitality of the Fenrisians. Moreover, this power armor is also equipped with an ancient relic from the Dark Age of technology. What exactly it is became a secret with the unfortunate death of the original master craftsman. All I know is that it can periodically release a searing shockwave that resembles a ring of fire and has a power roughly equivalent to a melta explosion. At this moment, as Bjorn the Fell-Handed's words had just fallen, Primarch Roche, who was observing the iron priests busying about, suddenly perked up and couldn't help but say, self-destruct armor. The Wolf King thought so too, so he would rather have the pups repair Frostfang for him after a fierce battle than wear this spare armor even temporarily. Primarch, do you have any taboos about this? If you really don't like it, we can think of another way. I think the Space Wolves can also find a master-class ancient power armor from the ancient reserves of the Fang. Bjorn the Fell-Handed slightly shifted his heavy steps. He said in a deep voice to Primarch Rorschach, who was standing aside. Old man, it seems that you don't understand my past preferences very well. My most proficient combat method is not melee combat, but small tricks like melt-a-bombs. As for taboos, I have no problem, this volcano's ring suits my heart very well. Primarch Rorschach said with a smile on his lips to Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Subsequently, with the manual assistance of more than a dozen iron priests in front of him and the surrounding litanies of prayer, a set of Primarch-level power armor with a dark red color on its ceramite shell slowly covered Primarch Rock's tall body. When all the armor components were carefully installed, it even directly increased his overall height to about 3 meters and 30 centimeters. The next moment, Primarch Rorschach slowly drove the heavy dark red mag boots and took the first step forward, leaving the installation platform. He subconsciously moved the joints of his tall body, trying to perform some more intense offensive movements. Dong dong dong. At this moment, Bjorn the Fell-Handed suddenly waved his massive power claw. He quickly ordered the Iron Priests to turn around and leave the Great Hall of the Fang, leaving only himself and Primarch Rorschach. How is it, Primarch, does this new power armor fit well? Bjorn the Fell-Handed asked Primarch Rorschach, who was jumping back and forth. Old man, is there something you want to say to me? Primarch Rorschach, who was lost in thought, slowly stopped the behavior of running in the volcano's ring. He narrowed his eyes and looked back and forth at the empty Great Hall of the Fang, and suddenly asked in a deep voice in the direction of Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Hee, it's not a good thing if the other young pups know about some things in advance. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who let out a low laugh, admitted it without any hesitation. He pondered for a moment, and then continued. Since the Primarch feels that the power armor fits very well, then why not inherit the Wolf King's past weapon as well? The Wolf King's weapon? Old man, you're not talking about the Spear of Russ, are you? Such an ancient and precious battle relic for the Space Wolves, if it falls into my hands, I think it would be a bit of a waste, because I am more skilled in using scythes and warhammers. However, I feel that what you want to express is another meaning, right? Haha. As expected, nothing can be hidden from the Primarch, so I'll tell you the truth. I want you to temporarily replace the yet-to-return Wolf King and become the second Primarch of our Space Wolves, leading those pups to continue fighting. In fact, at this moment, Primarch Rogel Dorn had already guessed some of the inside story of Bjorn the Fell-Handed's thoughts. On one hand, the Space Wolves were the most honored of the first founding legions. However, due to the disappearance of Leman Russ, coupled with the Wolves' inherent disdain for the bureaucratic forces within the Imperium and the Codex Astartes, even with the sacrifices and contributions of the Space Wolves on countless intense battlefields, they received the least amount of praise and honor. Although those bureaucratic forces did not dare to openly oppress a first founding chapter, they likely engaged in plenty of behind-the-scenes sabotage. This situation would only be thoroughly alleviated after Lord Regent Guilliman awoke and returned, and with the additional help of Primarch Rogel Dorn, rectified the High Lords of Terra. As for the other aspect of the problem, Primarch Rogel Dorn also believed it was related to Bjorn the Fell-Handed himself. As one of the oldest Astartes in the current Imperium, Bjorn the Fell-Handed's age was indeed too great. Even though he would only awaken from the stasis field when the Space Wolves or Fenris faced a major crisis, or when the garrison strength of the Fang was relatively weak, the ancient dreadnought was ultimately a mobile iron coffin akin to a torture device. Every Astartes veteran entombed within would either shed their last drop of blood for the chapter, or silently pass away in slumber, their souls returning to the throne. Although Bjorn the Fell-Handed had not yet awaited the true return of Leman Russ, and welcomed the final hour of the Wolf together with the Primarch of the Space Wolves, after seeing Primarch Rogel Dorn, who had a very close relationship with the Space Wolves, Bjorn the Fell-Handed also had some thoughts of wanting to peacefully slumber. In his opinion, rather than him, an old wolf who had lost his edge, taking care of the wolf cubs, it would be better to let Primarch Rogel Dorn, who was no different from Leman Russ, lead the Space Wolves. At this moment, Primarch Rogel Dorn, taking a deep breath, propelled the fires of the Angel forward. He came to Bjorn the Fell-Handed and began to engage in a more in-depth conversation with him. After all, from Rogel Dorn's perspective, the inclusion of the Space Wolves posed no problem. His Primarch Legion would eventually gather the Astartes of all chapters, and the sons of all Primarchs were also his sons. However, since Leman Russ himself was still traversing the warp for the Emperor, Primarch Rogel Dorn, as a brother, could not act too extremely. He could become one of the Primarchs leading the Space Wolves to continue fighting, but from beginning to end, the Primarch of the Space Wolves was and would only ever be one person, and that was Leman Russ. Even if Leman Russ might not care about such trivial matters at all, Primarch Rogel Dorn had to maintain this red line in his heart, lest certain treacherous chaos gods seize certain flaws to sow discord among brothers in the future. Over the next period of time, Primarch Rogel Dorn also recounted to Bjorn the Fell-Handed many major events, such as their arrival from the future timeline and the return of Lord Regent Guilliman. This undoubtedly injected a renewed vitality and hope into the gradually withering and weary depths of Bjorn the Fell-Handed's heart. That was that in the near future, Leman Russ would also return to Fenris once again, like Guilliman, and continue to lead the Space Wolves to fight for the Imperium and the Emperor. In the end, Bjorn the Fell-Handed also solemnly stated to Primarch Rogel Dorn that he had indeed harbored the thought of entrusting the future to the Primarch, wanting to explain everything clearly before entering a longer state of slumber. But now, Primarch Rogel Dorn's words and future experiences had rekindled a continuous stream of thoughts in him. He would continue to watch over all the wolf cubs with his crippled body until Leman Russ truly returned. At the same time, Primarch Rogel Dorn also declined to accept the Spear of Russ. This ancient relic, which had once wounded Horus, was, after all, an extremely powerful war asset and a chapter relic that maintained the cohesion of the Space Wolves. It would indeed be a pity for him to take it away. Subsequently, Primarch Rogel Dorn gave all the panaceas he carried to Bjorn the Fell-Handed, only leaving behind a few panaceas as a safeguard. After Bjorn the Fell-Handed, whose crippled body was confined within the dreadnought, took a panacea in front of Primarch Rogel Dorn. Although he was still unable to leave this mobile iron coffin, both his mental state and the severe injuries he had suffered were greatly alleviated. Soon after, Primarch Rogel Dorn, wearing the fires of the angel on his tall frame, returned to Rogel Dorn the Wild Wolf and the others. He also revealed Bjorn the Fell-Handed's statement to the other two. After all the great companies had completed the great hunt and returned to Fenris, Bjorn would select suitable Astartes from among them to form a great company to be taken away by Primarch Rogel Dorn. Rogel Dorn the Wild Wolf undoubtedly became the most excited person among the three, because there were finally more Space Wolves in his brother's Primarch Legion. After Cypher Rogel Dorn and Primarch Rogel Dorn quietly watched the other party vent some of his energy like a husky, they continued to carry out the next plan and experiment. They first found several rune priests who were still inside the Fang. Among them, Stormcaller Angel Stormcaller also volunteered to join after hearing the Primarch's request. Thus, inside an ancient ritual hall that simultaneously possessed statues of the Emperor and Leman Russ, a lengthy prayer activity that would last a long time was slowly unfolding. As time slowly passed, the group led by Primarch Rogel Dorn clearly sensed strands of visible psychic flames gradually emerging from the Emperor's ancient statue. In the next second, Stormcaller Angel Stormcaller and the other rune priests, who had exchanged glances with each other, cautiously released their psychic powers and began to summon a warp gate that could connect to their homeworld under the Emperor's gaze. Ka. I don't know how long it had been. The diplomacy page of the simulator suddenly appeared in front of Primarch Rogel Dorn, who was kneeling on one knee, and the text labels belonging to Fenris and the Space Wolves slowly appeared on it. Immediately afterwards, in the air below the Emperor's statue, a spatial rift gate with jagged edges quickly tore open within everyone's field of vision. Cypher Rogel Dorn, who was obviously more cautious than before, preemptively threw an automatic servo robot into the opening portal. After the returning automatic servo robot waved its mechanical tentacles to indicate that the other side of the portal was their long unreturned homeworld, even Primarch Rogel Dorn, who had a calm expression, subconsciously exhaled a breath and smiled at Rogel Dorn, the wild wolf standing beside him. Buzz buzz buzz. Inside the brightly lit circular plaza, Ukar, the grim-faced lexiconium of the Carcharodons, stood on a metallic-looking floor. He strained his dark eyes, staring intently at the spatial rift portal that had suddenly appeared in front of the Emperor's statue. With no psychic warning or premonition from the Emperor, Ukar instinctively tightened his grip on the bolter pistol and power sword at his power armor's waist with his thick-fingered hands. At the same time, fully armed Moritat Secutors and even larger Castellan-class battle automata were awakening from their dormant state. Then, the murderous battle automata legion quickly moved their heavy steps, heavily surrounding the interior of the entire circular plaza. The next second, before more Hellfire lascannons and even more terrifying melter arrays hidden within the surrounding walls could fully rotate out. Thud! An automated servo automata suddenly appeared from the spatial rift, waving several mechanical tentacles and landing heavily on the metal floor. At this moment, Ukar, the grim-faced lexiconium of the Carcharodons, seemed slightly stunned. He seemed to vaguely remember something. He quickly intercepted the intrusion alert information that was being sent outward from within his power armor. This meant that the intrusion alert only transmitted to the interior of the Twin Peaks base and stopped propagating outward. Sure enough, just as the other party hesitated slightly, the surrounding battle automata legion did not immediately open fire. The automated servo automata, which had been probing the environment, also quickly returned to the interior of the spatial rift portal. Thud thud thud. Soon after, Primarch Loken, whose robust body, over 3 meters tall, was clad in crimson Mark VI power armor, and a white wolf pelt draped over his thick crimson pauldrons, slowly stepped out of the spatial rift portal. Immediately following, Sevatar Loken, with a bandaged greatsword strapped to the back of his dark green power armor, and the wild wolf Loken, with an expression of incomparable excitement, also stepped into this place one after another. And behind them, Lucas the Trickster, his slightly widened eyes seemingly filled with curiosity, and the Rune Priest, Stormcaller Angel, with a slightly solemn expression, quickly revealed their very conspicuous towering figures. After the spatial rift portal, located in the center of the circular plaza, quickly closed, the Carcharodon's lexiconium, whose state of alert clearly relaxed, immediately activated his power armor and stepped forward, bowing respectfully in the direction of Primarch Loken. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at the other two mysterious Astartes, whose appearances and expressions were almost identical to Primarch Loken. The words he was about to ask were swallowed back down into his stomach. Ukar, how long have I been gone this time? Primarch Loken, taking a deep breath of the local air, looked down at the Carcharodon's lexiconium in front of him and asked. Respected Primarch, you have been gone for about 3 years this time. Please forgive my impudence, but during these long days of your absence, many great things have happened on our Terra. Ukar cautiously said to Primarch Loken, whose figure was even taller than before, and whose aura was even more profound. However, at this moment, before Primarch Loken could open his mouth to ask the other party for more detailed information. Thud thud thud. Accompanying a series of extremely dense, heavy footsteps constantly transmitted from the direction of the wide passageway. The metal caterpillar ship Spirit Cortana, whose entire body was wrapped in blue ceramide armor, quickly entered the interior of the circular plaza, moving a large number of metal limbs back and forth. Welcome back, respected Primarch. The ship Spirit Cortana's obviously more feminine and gentle mechanical voice slowly echoed in everyone's ears. This made Lucas the Trickster and Stormcaller Angel, who had never seen artificial intelligence before, become even more nervous. On the contrary, the snarling wild wolf Loken and the squinting Sevatar Loken repeatedly sized up the ship Spirit, which seemed different from what they remembered. Cortana, why are you here to greet us? Isn't David at the Twin Peaks base? Primarch Loken stared at the ship Spirit Cortana, who was slowly stopping her huge metal body, and asked her in a deep voice. Primarch, Mr. David is currently not on the island. It's a long story, so why don't we change locations first? I can also briefly report to you on our development status and many achievements over these years in place of Mr. David. What do you think? At this moment, the ship spirit Cortana said to Primarch Loken and the others in a gentle tone. Primarch Loken, who slightly raised an eyebrow, did not show any extra emotion on his bronze face. He first had the Carcharodon's Lexiconium Ukar continue to accumulate the psychic power to communicate and open the warp portal, which would definitely be useful later. Then, Primarch Loken quickly activated the Ring of Fire, leading the surrounding people and striding out of the circular plaza. Soon after, inside the base hall, whose overall area seemed even wider and larger than before. On the metal walls, covered in bright light, in addition to displaying some of the spoils that Primarch Loken had once obtained. There were also many prototypes of technological weapons and even heavy vehicles displayed there as collectibles. And next to a metal round table, completely forged from vibranium. Loken and the others, with indifferent expressions, were quietly listening to the ship spirit Cortana's report. At present, what Primarch Loken was most concerned about was the whereabouts and movements of Iron Man David. And when the ship spirit Cortana mobilized a series of real-time virtual projections from within her huge metal body. Even Sevatar Loken, who was sitting aside with his eyes closed to rest, subconsciously opened his eyes, carefully sizing up the scene in front of him with a look of surprise. At this moment, on a huge plain with sparse green trees, almost densely packed, with no end in sight, automated servo-automata cannon fodder and a surprisingly large number of battle automata legions were launching a continuous barrage of fire at a giant city shrouded in an ultra-large energy shield in front of the battlefield. At the same time, 3 sky carriers, always suspended thousands of meters in the air, were repeatedly launching extremely terrifying lance bombardments at the ultra-large energy shield below, attempting to completely shatter all the defensive power of the unknown forces. If the combat situation and image information that had just been presented were still within the expectations of Primarch Loken and the others. Because that looked like nothing more than an ordinary siege war with a decent intensity. But when the ship spirit Cortana slightly adjusted more real-time broadcast virtual projections, Iron Man David, with his black metal skeleton body sitting in a floating chair, slowly revealed his familiar figure. At this moment, with blue light flickering in his eye sockets, he seemed to be discussing the next battle plan with about half a company of Lamenters in Terminator armor and a large group of high-spirited mutant troops. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Only in Primarch Rock's memory. He doesn't seem to have ever seen Iron Man David show signs of anger or rage because of any problem or individual matter. At least, not in all the years he's spent with him. On the contrary, it's often Iron Man David who's trying to dissuade Primarch Roche in various ways. This is probably related to his logical thinking as a mechanical life form, or perhaps his tens of thousands of years of wandering. Over the next period of time, the soft narration from the shipboard spirit, Cortana, also gradually made Primarch Roche and the others understand why Iron Man David, who had never had much negative emotion, would launch a siege against a mere human city. The giant city that is currently being bombarded and besieged by terrifying firepower, yet still stands tall, is the only location in the homeworld that produces raw vibranium, the mysterious nation located on the African continent, Wakanda. The cause of all this is centered on a team member that Primarch Roche had almost forgotten. That is Ulysses Clow, who was extremely loyal after being brainwashed by Iron Man David. In order to obtain more vibranium for the Gemini Island base, and for a more stable vibranium production route, he tried every means to find a Wakandan royal bloodline from another continent who had been exiled from Wakanda for many years. Clow wanted to secretly support this commoner prince named Eric Killmonger, to let him return to the interior of Wakanda and try to obtain the lofty royal status, so as to collect a greater quantity of raw vibranium. In fact, if they could have planned it properly, Even if they had informed Iron Man David of this matter in advance, then there might have been a chance of success. However, Clow, eager to make a contribution, and Prince Killmonger, who had been driven out of Wakanda since childhood and extremely hated the Wakandan royal family, launched a court coup with a desperate gamble. In the beginning, Clow and the others completely gained the upper hand because of the old Wakandan king's slight feelings of guilt towards Prince Killmonger. With the efforts of a group of nameless supervillains recruited with money, and without much fierce resistance from internal forces, they forcibly controlled a stable situation for a period of time. However, when Iron Man David occasionally learned that the transport route of raw vibranium had been forcibly interrupted, he learned from Clow's incompetent subordinates that the other party had become a prisoner of the Wakandans. This was originally a very easy thing to solve. Whether it was to conduct more effective communication at the official level, or to secretly send a Raven Guard champion proficient in shadow lurking to rescue him, either was a viable solution. However, the main problem was, just when Clow and the others tried to carry out a court coup, the old king of Wakanda unfortunately became one of the victims. And the new king, Black Panther, T'Challa, immediately announced that he would use the lives of Clow and Prince Killmonger to pay tribute to his kingly father. To some extent, the Wakandans did nothing wrong. An eye for an eye, blood for blood, is also the cold-blooded approach of the Terra Astartes Legion in dealing with any enemy. However, with Clow's death, the Gemini Island base's channel for obtaining raw vibranium was completely cut off, and Wakanda itself did not allow raw vibranium to flow out. Although the Gemini Islands also have a large number of Antarctic vibranium mines, the lack of raw vibranium is still a huge loss. So, after repeatedly thinking about it, Iron Man David began to put pressure on Wakanda from the official level in Asia and Europe, as well as the mutant nation, wanting to reach a trade channel for exchanging Antarctic vibranium for raw vibranium. At the same time, he also mobilized 2 Raven Guard champions who had been trying to fan the flames of revolution in South America, to rescue Clow himself. As for the final result, for some unknown reason, this rescue operation against Clow unfortunately failed. The 2 Raven Guard champions also used all their skills to break a bloody path out of the encirclement of the Wakandan vibranium armored forces, and escaped from the area. And the unlucky Clow was executed by the Wakandans that very day. Prince Killmonger, on the other hand, was sentenced to life imprisonment and imprisoned in a Wakandan prison due to the infighting between the 5 tribal clans within Wakanda. In fact, if the matter had ended here, it wouldn't have developed to the point it is now. After all, there was still some room for negotiation between the 2 sides, and the merchant and mining tribes within Wakanda were also somewhat interested in Iron Man David's proposal for a trade channel. However, the new Wakandan king, Black Panther, T'Challa, delivered a righteous and impassioned speech at the United Nations Security Council before internal affairs had been fully dealt with. The content of his speech completely alluded to the Terra Astartes Legion and the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, who were the masterminds behind the scenes. However, when Iron Man David freed up some time alone, he began to focus his attention on the African continent, and after sending a large number of intelligence personnel there, the intelligence data that kept pouring in completely shattered Iron Man David's impression of the Wakandans. Disease, famine, hunger, all kinds of terrible disasters that should not have appeared on the African continent have never been far from the people here. And Wakanda, which has a self-sufficient vibranium technology system, is not as righteous as they show to the outside world. These Wakandans clearly possess vibranium technology and technical means far surpassing the past to save their human compatriots of the same skin color. However, the Wakandans, especially the Golden Tribe in a leading position, used the excuse of preventing precious vibranium from being coveted by outsiders, and did not show any action or assistance. They have only coldly watched countless human compatriots being killed, starved to death, and completely buried in the deepest part of the African continent in the countless years of the past. Soon after, Iron Man David, who planned to take the opportunity to control most of the African continent for development and construction, transferred a large number of people belonging to Imperial Heavy Industries, as well as many medical sisters who were in the internship stage, to every country on the African continent to carry out preliminary work. A large number of intelligence agents from the Assassin organization quickly controlled every country and region except Wakanda by means of assassination, brainwashing, and so on. However, when a large number of people from imperial heavy industries began to secretly dissolve the government departments of these originally destitute countries, forming a nominal close alliance, wanting to uniformly mobilize and allocate more resources, the Wakandans, who had been observing for a long time, forcibly launched one barbaric and rude act of destruction after another outside the borders of Wakanda, citing the reasons that imperial heavy industries coveted their vibranium mines, damaged the local environment, and even promoted the heroic act of justice, resulting in a large number of casualties among ordinary personnel on the team's side. Even if a Karkarodon's battle squad nearby wiped out the other side's attacking team on the spot. But even now, Iron Man David, who is puzzled, has still not been able to analyze the Wakandans' behavioral logic of being so decisive. He can only judge from the other party's current series of reckless actions. That is, the Wakandans have gradually developed a kind of arrogance and possessiveness from the depths of their souls because they have long monopolized the vibranium mines since ancient times, and have successfully developed their own vibranium technology. Perhaps in the eyes of most Wakandans, they are superior people located in a paradise, and the rest of the human beings on the African continent and even the whole world are just humanoid creatures that look similar to them. Therefore, facing this arrogant attitude that even mechanical life cannot understand, especially after learning that the early pioneering team has also suffered great losses and casualties. The more Iron Man David thought about it, the angrier he became, and he decided to give the Wakandans a bloody lesson they would never forget, and also take this opportunity to completely control the entire African continent and the extremely valuable vibranium mines. Since these Wakandans care so much about vibranium, then let them mine for the human empire for the rest of their lives. At this point, the shipboard spirit Cortana finished telling the crowd around the vibranium round table the cause and effect of the whole thing. And Primarch Roche and the others who heard this did not have the slightest aversion to Iron Man David's actions. Now, the homeworld of the human empire under Primarch Roche's leadership, although it does care more about humanity itself to a certain extent, and its style of doing things is not as demonic and rigid as the human empire. But if anyone mistakenly thinks that the Terra Astartes Legion has become a toothless tiger, then they must be prepared to be uprooted by the Astartes. As the real-time virtual projections disappeared one by one, the matter of Iron Man David came to a conclusion. At Primarch Roche's signal, the shipboard AI Cortana continued with the rest of her report. First was the development situation on the homeworld. Currently, the foundries on the second Sun Island can mass-produce the Griffin the 4th pattern Lehman Russ tanks and its affiliated models, Medusa siege guns, Chimera armored personnel carriers, and other heavy vehicles. Furthermore, the production line for night battle armor is also gradually being established. It's just that due to the lack of Redidus's ingenious ideas, the overall progress is very slow. The number of sky motherships produced by the Hydra Island foundries has also reached about 5. However, manufacturing has ceased there, and it has become a docking and maintenance base and a testing ground for space warships. After all, sky motherships are large flying vehicles within the atmosphere, and the current number is sufficient for use. As for the Antarctic airbase, its construction has also been completed. Now, with the vigorous research and assistance of Iron Man David and Tony, among others, it has successfully achieved the powerful production capacity of producing one Cobra-class destroyer and one Sword-class frigate per year. Moreover, it is the kind that is autonomously constructed by countless automatic servo robots and a large number of automatic assembly lines based on warship design blueprints, automatically obtaining mineral resources. In a sense, it can also be regarded as a large-scale imitation project of the STC template. Therefore, the number of space warships possessed by the homeworld is steadily increasing year by year. Although it currently appears to be only 3 Cobra-class destroyers and 3 Sword-class frigates. But with the passage of time and the release of more productivity, the homeworld will also have the ability and potential to build and produce large warships. At the same time, the mutants have also obtained a complete Leman Russ tank production line and corresponding permissions from Iron Man David due to their series of contributions and efforts over the years. They are currently gradually replacing their internal armored forces. In addition, their manufacturing plan for mobile hive cities is also continuing to advance. Currently, about 1/3 of the entire European region has been successfully equipped with modular mobile hive cities. It is said that they have also gained the spontaneous support of many civilians, who have taken the lead in becoming the first batch of residents. Soon, if the African continent also successfully enters a controlled state, then the manufacturing plan for mobile hive cities is estimated to continue. In Asia, Iron Man David has also secretly met with the leadership in recent years and reached a deeper cooperation agreement. Currently, in addition to the foundries on Second Sun Island, the Asian region also has complete production lines for Valkyrie transport aircraft and Thunderhawk transport aircraft, as well as many Mechanicus technologies that are far ahead of the times. According to Iron Man David's subsequent plans, if everything goes smoothly, then the construction of large warships in the future can be safely handed over to the Asian side. Next, the shipboard AI Cortana began to briefly describe the situation of the team members to Primarch Roche and others. Tony and Thor's Revenge Inquisition is developing well. They have formed a complete strategy internally, excavating superheroes from a large number of civilians, and even pardoning some super-villains who are not guilty of death and have the possibility of repentance. The vast majority of people, after long-term training, will become constables in a certain city or region, assisting local management departments in their work. As for the very few who have more firm beliefs and strong mental will, they will be sent to the Gemini Island base for more rigorous training, and eventually embark on the difficult path of becoming an Inquisitor. Of course, the thriving Revenge Inquisition is not being driven by Tony himself, but by Pepper Potts, who is managing things behind the scenes. As for Tony, he is wholeheartedly devoted to the design and construction of the planetary defense plan. The Stark Tower in low Earth orbit, as the core area of the Revenge Inquisition, is gradually being expanded into a large metal fortress. Currently, batches of experimental, modified weapon arrays jointly manufactured by Tony and Doom have been installed on it, and they are eagerly awaiting some ignorant enemies to test the power of their weapons. As for the lunar base that was still under construction before, the majority of the basic construction has been completed. Currently, a large number of defensive firepower facilities and a spaceport in lunar orbit are being built to lay a firmer foundation for the future battle moonization of the Moon. Tony has also used the Space Stone to send a large number of automatic servo robots to the surface of Mars to carry out the construction of another Martian base and the large-scale deployment of early warning detection arrays. At the same time, Thor, the god of thunder, has not been idle either. He not only needs to train the newcomers who have joined the Revenge Inquisition. He also needs to undertake the task of traveling back and forth between Asgard and Terra. Because King Odin no longer stays in the immortal palace for long. Thor, the god of thunder, as the heir to Asgard, must assume corresponding obligations and responsibilities. The same is true for Kamar Taj. The Ancient One rarely shows up anymore, and although Doctor Strange has not yet obtained the title of Sorcerer Supreme. However, he is also establishing his own prestige and connections within the mage forces. The only problem is that the number of invasions by various monsters from the magical world is far more frequent than in the past. This has also led to the loss of personnel in the mage forces becoming a matter that needs to be resolved as soon as possible. Primarch Roche is more concerned about the current progress of Doom and Reed's research plan on faster-than-light engines, which is currently unclear. To be precise, the shipboard AI Cortana does not have the authority to know the information, and can only ask Iron Man David or Doom about it later. So, after briefly inquiring about the situation of the others, Primarch Roche, Cypher Roche, and Wildwolf Roche, who looked at each other, gradually became busy. Wildwolf Roche drove his power armor and got up to find Ukari, the brain-eater shark librarian. He needs to send the news of the Primarch's safe return to the interior of the Primarch Legion. At the same time, let Redditus return to the homeworld once again to re-lead the technological development of the homeworld. Cypher Roche ordered the shipboard AI Cortana to prepare a remote teleportation for him. He wants to go to Iron Man David's side to take a look, at least to speed up the progress of the war on the African continent. Primarch Roche also drove the volcano ring to stand up, and he plans to find Teacher Connors and Professor Banner first. Because according to the shipboard AI Cortana, they have also made a lot of new progress in their research on Astartes in recent years. Deep within the Twins Islands base, inside a massive bio-lab, so vast it practically occupied an entire floor of the base. The Primarch, Rog, clad in his dark red volcanic ring armor, underwent repeated automated disinfection and cleaning. He was then completely enveloped in an oversized, sterile protective suit by automated servo robots. Led by these robots, he traversed the lab, passing by large culture vessels containing superhuman organs and gene seed cultivations, as well as specimen displays of over a dozen Astartes corpses, before entering the inner sanctum of Professor Connors' laboratory. Professor Connors, setting aside his experimental data, exchanged brief greetings with the long-unseen Primarch before quickly getting to the point. Primarch, as you witnessed upon your arrival, we can now cultivate and produce superhuman organs and gene seed in limited quantities within a laboratory setting. Furthermore, under the repeated guidance and experimentation of several Astartes apothecaries, we have successfully mastered all surgical procedures required to create Astartes. Currently, I am recruiting loyal mortal individuals from various regions under our control, putting them through brainwashing and screening before initiating apprentice-level training courses. It's not that we are unwilling to expand the scale of surgical training, it's just that we have yet to master the ability to mass-produce gene seed. However, during a previous round-table meeting, Mr. Reed, our team's technology advisor, proposed a potentially unethical idea, using a cloning technology acquired from the xenomorphs, one entirely devoid of moral constraints, to mass-produce ignorant human clones for large-scale gene seed cultivation. Naturally, this proposal was rejected by the majority at the round table. Even Mr. Doom considered it too cruel and heartless. Professor Connor's words had barely faded when Primarch Rog shook his head slightly and said in a low voice, "Perhaps this method sounds cruel, but it is said that the Mechanicum directly uses mortal slaves to carry out the mass production of gene seed and superhuman organs. The battle situation on our side is becoming increasingly complex and difficult, and you will need to make some sacrifices here as well. Professor, I, as Primarch, authorize you to attempt the mass production of gene seed. Every sacrifice of a human clone will allow one or several Astartes to step onto the battlefield, so even if those clones truly possess a so-called soul, they can return to the throne." Rog, his expression indifferent, exhaled forcefully. He shifted his gaze slightly, looking through the transparent laboratory door at a space marine quietly submerged in formalin, then turned to Professor Connors and said. After a moment of silence, Professor Connors, seemingly aged by years, sighed heavily and looked up at Primarch Rog, saying, "May the ethereal Emperor forgive our actions. Primarch, during your absence, we have successfully cultivated a batch of gene seed belonging to the Lamenter's chapter and completed the transformation surgeries for these new recruits. According to the feedback they have constantly sent us, there is approximately a 1/3 difference in initial combat effectiveness between a recruit implanted with a cultivated gene seed and one implanted with a gene seed matured within an Astartes. Of course, this gap will gradually close with training, combat, and the combat experience injected by the knowledge crowns, so it's not a major issue. In other words, as long as we possess the gene seed of other chapters, we can manufacture and produce Astartes. Next, I plan to use the gene seed of the Raven Guard to create a batch of new recruits and have the remaining Raven Guard champions lead their training. Oh, and as far as I know, Professor Banner previously used some Raven Guard gene seed for a series of genetic modification experiments, hoping to compensate for the gene defects in the gene seed, but David halted his research progress. Although I don't know exactly what happened, Professor Banner should have some unconventional progress or changes there. At this moment, Professor Connor's low words quickly caught Primarch Rog's attention. After further discussions with Professor Connors about the Astartes issue, Primarch Rog, without looking back, activated the power armor encased in the sterile protective suit and, led by the automated servo robots, walked towards Professor Banner's laboratory. Soon after, Primarch Rog, stepping into another laboratory, began a more in-depth exchange with Professor Banner, who maintained his Hulk form. Faced with Primarch Rog's inquiry, Professor Banner, removing his black-rimmed glasses from his green face, hesitated slightly before beginning to confess the situation to Primarch Rog. It turned out that Professor Banner, while modifying the genetic defects of the Raven Guard gene seed, accidentally contaminated several gene seed with the Hulk's blood and gamma radiation to some extent. Professor Banner initially thought these gene seed would be destroyed, but he did not expect the contaminated gene seed to undergo even more drastic mutations. After Professor Banner's later careful examination, some of the genetic defects that originally existed in the Raven Guard gene seed were successfully compensated. However, other genes also underwent some unknown mutations, whether good or bad. Primarch, that's the current situation. I don't know more about the data and experiments, because Mr. David forcefully interrupted all my research progress after learning about this. So, I now want to apply to you to start this modification plan that I named, Giant Raven Guard. I want to test the final results of these gene seed by creating an Astartes. At this moment, hearing Professor Banner's somewhat cautious words, Primarch Rog frowned slightly. He was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Banner, if you can continuously stabilize the benign mutations in the Raven Guard gene seed, I don't object to you conducting an extremely bold modification experiment. But if you create a gamma monster based on the Astartes, then don't blame me. All your research data will be completely sealed up, and you yourself will be deprived of any authority and resources you currently possess. You can only follow me as a warrior on a long journey of battles. That is the restriction and price I offer you. What do you think? Is it to completely abandon this research in the future, or are you planning to bet everything on it?" Hearing Primarch Rog's words, Professor Banner lowered his entire head slightly. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly raised his green face and said firmly, "Primarch, I am willing to bet my future on it. Because once my Giant Raven Guard plan succeeds, it will represent a new realm for the combat effectiveness and battlefield survivability of the Astartes. Because that will be a group of smaller gamma giants. Of course, if my guess and plan fail miserably, then I am also willing to pay the corresponding price for the mortal compatriot who unfortunately becomes a sacrifice for the modification." "Very well, Professor, I expect you to succeed. In order to ensure the success rate of this modification surgery, I allow you to find a mortal warrior from the Stormtrooper Company who is willing to join this modification surgery." At this moment, Primarch Rog, slowly activating the volcanic ring power armor and rising from the seat, looked down at Professor Banner, who was only half a head shorter than him, and made the final decision. Then, he turned and walked out of the laboratory, leaving behind the Hulk, whose expression on his green face became more and more firm and solemn. "As the Giant Raven Guard, a blessing or a curse? That needs to be judged after everything is completed. Although I am a scientist without faith, I also hope that the Emperor can bless the modification plan later on." When the last wisp of blood-red sunset slanted across the cold, grim metal surfaces of the mobile arcologies, even the most difficult artists and painters in Europe had to sigh in admiration. What unfolded before their eyes was an eerie scene of futuristic technology intertwined with modern life. Not to mention, for countless lower and middle-class people with meager incomes, the requirements to move into a mobile arcology were incredibly simple and convenient. Each massive mobile arcology had no restrictions regarding nationality or race, for the sake of cultural integration between different ethnic groups. If an applicant possessed one or two skills related to manufacturing, they would receive priority for residency. Even without such skills, or even any education, it didn't prevent any resident from participating in the Empire Heavy Industries free technical worker training courses. And once a complete poor family or a single resident of military service age successfully obtained the qualifications to live in a mobile arcology, a young female soldier in the Defense Force Guard uniform and a young male soldier in the Imperial Navy uniform would personally lead an automatic servo robot to their door. They would patiently explain to each family or individual the enormous income and hidden benefits of joining the Defense Force Guard or participating in the Naval Loyal Academy selection. Even if a significant portion of the residents had no interest in this, it didn't prevent them from obtaining corresponding work income and abundant food resources through participating in the vigorous recruitment of various industrial manufacturing departments within the mobile arcology. Of course, unless the resident was a young child or an elderly person. Otherwise, all residents living in the mobile arcology must participate in internal industrial production tasks in accordance with relevant regulations. Those who violated the regulations would have all their human rights stripped by the Arcology Management Committee and would be forcibly expelled from the mobile arcology by automatic servo robots. As for the Arcology Management Committee, it was actually a subordinate unit auxiliary personnel specially selected from the Defense Force Guard in the European region, responsible for undertaking the internal operation and maintenance tasks of the arcology. In addition, each arcology chief in the Arcology Management Committee also silently shouldered a secret mission. That was that when the order from the Gemini Islands was issued, they would immediately activate the mobile and combination functions within the mobile arcology. They would combine with other surrounding mobile arcologies to form a larger combat fortress, or a mobile arcology version of a giant titan. As the dim night gradually descended, the dilapidated streets outside each mobile arcology seemed to fall into a completely different and unfamiliar world. Squads of X-Men patrolled teams wearing heavy armor with black and yellow camouflage, and basically not carrying heavy weapons, landed heavily from the roaring Lightning Hawk transport aircraft with vector engines. And without any hesitation, they launched a necessary cleanup operation on the city streets surrounding the arcology. In fact, not everyone was grateful for the arrival of the mobile arcologies. Those wealthy classes at the top of the social food chain, and even the libertarians willing to pay any price to leave their homes, were ultimately just a minority. Moreover, the vast majority of these people voluntarily went to the North American continent, which seemed about to become a sanctuary for super criminals and villains. After the vast majority of people who wanted a stable life entered the mobile arcologies to work and live, then those who still chose to stay within the city limits, besides the super villains whose identities were a mystery, were many human heretical elements who were extremely opposed to the existence of mobile arcologies or were expelled from them. Now, the meaning of the existence of the X-Men patrol team was to specifically target these people. Possessing various superpowers, they would try their best to capture the other party within the conditions permitted by imperial law, and then choose to execute them on the spot or imprison them depending on the degree of the crime committed. And when the gathering scale of heretical elements exceeded the X-Men patrol team's ability to handle it, or when some super villains who wanted to become famous overnight came to make trouble, causing casualties even to the X-Men patrol team, fully armed Astartes companies and stormtrooper companies would, according to the severity of the situation on the ground, choose to take Lightning Hawk transport aircraft from the sky carrier or directly arrive at the target location through teleportation technology. However, when the Astartes successfully descended, even if the visitor was the Crying Sun's company, which had the best attitude towards mortals, they would definitely not show mercy, but would kill any heretical element that threatened the rule of the Empire based on past combat experience. Dong dong dong. With the sound of footsteps approaching from far and near, an X-Men patrol team composed of 5 people was running quickly on the dimly lit, dilapidated city streets. The sparse light scattered from the distant, massive mobile arcologies occasionally reflected on their heavy armor. Right now, This team was pursuing a group of human heretical elements who had once tried to blow up a mobile arcology. Temporarily stop advancing. Comrade Chen, please use your mutant ability on the spot. We need to check the historical scene here before we can continue to follow the traces of those heretical elements. Cyclops Scott, wearing a special eyepiece on his angular face, suddenly ordered the patrol team to stop advancing. He turned his head and quickly said to a female team member behind him. And the other party waved a slender palm without any hesitation. Z's. In the next second, extremely dense white energy particles quickly condensed on the street within a radius of tens of meters. Then, blurry human figures composed of white energy particles began to constantly appear within the field of vision of everyone. Captain, look, according to the restoration of the historical scene, there is no mistake in our tracking direction. Those heretical elements did pass through this place. Wait, I seem to have discovered that 2 unregistered outsiders have just been here. At this moment, the female team member, waving her slender palm back and forth, used her mutant ability to temporarily restore the historical scene. The fresh traces left behind by 2 blurry figures, one large and one small, were completely revealed in Cyclops Scott's red vision. What is this tall guy wearing? A suit of power armor. Could it be an Astartes? That's not right. The Astartes company will notify us in advance before taking any action, and they usually carry out combat operations based on combat squads, rarely performing tasks alone. And this little guy carrying a huge weapon box behind him, looks like a minor. I've never seen an Astartes recruit who hasn't come of age. Comrade Nightcrawler Wagner, you come with me, let's track down these 2 unregistered uninvited guests. Comrade Chen, you continue to lead the others to track down the traces of that group of heretical elements. If you find that you can't handle it, then notify the other X-Men patrol teams. Storm Monroe's team is also carrying out a cleanup operation in the nearby city. As soon as Cyclops finished speaking, he immediately led a male mutant whose exposed skin was dark blue. The overall shape looked like a humanoid demon and dashed towards other directions of the city streets. Subsequently, the 2 people's strong backs quickly disappeared into the dark shadows of a dark street, as if they were completely swallowed by the thick darkness. Instructor, do you Inquisitors ever need to use the restroom when wearing power armor? A young voice, slightly green, asked with curiosity. The power armor for mortals has a system specifically designed to handle urine and feces. At the same time, we try to supplement with high-protein liquid foods to avoid ingesting large amounts of solid food. Another voice, a deep and resonant male voice, replied patiently. Instructor, do you know what it feels like to be hit by a bolter? I mean, have you ever been hit by a bolter or other weapons before? The words had barely fallen. The owner of the young voice couldn't wait to ask. The owner of the deep voice paused slightly before saying, with a hint of helplessness. As far as I know, there isn't a single bolter that can escape our control system. And usually, unless you're wearing power armor or have innate physical superpowers, no mortal without biochemical modifications or auxiliary armor can use a bolter. As for whether I've been hit by a bolter, I can tell you that during my initial training, I was hunted by a company champion from the Raven Guard for an entire day and night, fully experiencing the torment of all weapons and equipment. The deep voice instantly excited the young man. He roared in a rapid, sharp voice. Oh, I know. Raven Guard. And an Astartes company champion. I heard a big sister named Jessica say it when I was at the Gemini Island training camp. And I heard that each Astartes chapter has a completely different focus and method of combat. Haha, their stories are really cool to watch and listen to. Peter, to become a qualified Inquisitor, you must learn to control your inner emotions. You're too excited. If we were on a real battlefield right now, you'd be dead. At that moment, Frank, wearing mortal power armor, abruptly stopped his magnetic boots and turned his head slightly. Frank's cold gaze stared at the short-haired teenager, who subconsciously revealed an awkward smile, and continued in a deep voice. Frankly, I'm starting to regret choosing you from among the many students. Even if all your training subjects are perfect, if you can't change this talkative, gossipy habit, let alone whether you can successfully become an inquisitor, you'll fall flat on your face because of it sooner or later. Facing Frank's stern words, Peter Parker, whose slightly shorter and sturdier frame was carrying a huge weapon case on his back, quickly nodded to apologize. "I'm sorry, instructor, I know I was wrong." At this moment, perhaps it was the short-haired teenager's extremely sincere apology. Or perhaps his youthful voice reminded Frank of some buried memories. In any case, Frank, taking a deep breath, seemed to soften his stern attitude a lot. He drove the mortal power armor forward, and his deep voice echoed in the ears of the short-haired teenager, "Peter. Peter, why did you choose to become an Inquisitor? According to your comprehensive conditions, whether it's the Revanche Inquisition, the Navy Schola Progenium, or even the Imperial Guard or the Intelligence Department, I'm afraid they'd all be scrambling to recruit you, right? Hee, instructor, do you want to hear the truth or a lie?" Carrying an extremely heavy and huge weapon case on his back, Peter, as if not feeling any effort at all, quickly caught up with Frank's pace. He wiggled his thick eyebrows above his bright eyes and asked the tall figure in front of him with a sly tone. "Kid, you can try telling a lie, but if I find any logical loopholes in it, then you can expect me to increase the intensity of your training." Frank, driving the mortal power armor forward, said without turning his head. Then I'll tell the truth. Instructor, the reason I chose to become an Inquisitor is because after repeated research and comparison, I found that the treatment of Inquisitors may be the best in all departments of the Legion. And I really need those regularly distributed panacea capsules after officially becoming an Inquisitor to completely cure my aunt's terminal illness and extend her life as much as possible. So, even though I myself admire the Astartes the most, when I learned that I would have to voluntarily give up my family and friends and undergo closed training for several years or even more than a decade, I gave up this option without hesitation. However, at this moment, Frank, whose facial expression was somewhat wry, stopped his heavy footsteps once again. He hesitated slightly, then drove the mortal power armor to turn around and said to Peter, who had widened his eyes, "Child, although I don't know where you got the internal information, I want to tell you that if we only look at the treatment situation, the Navy Schola Progenium is undoubtedly the combat department with the best internal treatment. And with your own comprehensive conditions and intelligence, if you choose to join the Navy, General Bucky and those high-level people would probably train you according to the path of a captain, and they would even issue you a complete panacea as a life guarantee from the beginning. How about this, Peter, after completing this internship, how about I recommend you to the Navy with my identity as an Inquisitor? My relationship with General Bucky is still okay, and he will definitely like a smart kid like you." At this moment, Frank's words gradually revealed a hint of hesitation on Peter's childish face. Having obtained Spider-Man's superpowers, he gave up the opportunity to be admitted to Imperial University, and even completed all high school courses in advance. It was to use his own intelligence to obtain the panacea that had always been rumored to exist on the internet from the Terra Star Realm Legion. In order to completely cure his aunt's weak body, which had been accidentally damaged by the explosion radiation of alien weapons. "Instructor, you must be testing my spiritual will, right? If I immediately agree with you, you will definitely lower the score of my internship task or even mark it as a failure, right?" Peter, taking a deep breath, was quickly awakened by the active thinking in his mind. He smiled and stared at Instructor Frank in front of him, saying slowly. Just as Frank shook his head slightly, he intended to solemnly say something to the short-haired teenager in front of him. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. One by one, the suddenly launched whirlwind missiles abruptly cut through the dark night sky above a large number of buildings, quickly launching a continuous barrage of fire on the streets where they were located. "Peter, help me open the weapon case. Choose the bolter and boarding shield." In an instant, a killing aura that had been honed on the battlefield instantly emanated from Frank's tall metal body. And the young Peter, whose short body reacted extremely quickly, also opened the huge weapon case located behind his spine with agile movements. His whole person leapt up several meters from the ground, and then used white spider silk shot from the mechanical device on his wrist, abruptly throwing a storm bolter and an extremely heavy boarding shield in the direction of the legendary Inquisitor Frank. Woohoo! The day of judgment for heretics and super villains has come. Super amazing invincible spider, long live. Rumble rumble. One after another, whistling whirlwind missiles bombarded and exploded on the already dilapidated city streets, scattering rubble and debris everywhere. However, neither Peter, who was relying on his strong spider silk and Peter Tingle, to flexibly dodge the massive explosive impacts and flying shrapnel in midair, nor Inquisitor Frank, who held his heavy boarding shield in front of him with his storm bolter mounted on the side, suffered any explosive damage. Chirp chirp chirp. The next second, Peter, with several strong strands of spider silk grabbing onto the towering buildings, flew quickly towards the direction from which the whirlwind missiles came with an extremely agile and flexible posture. He even used his booted feet to run forward on the surfaces of the buildings as if walking on flat ground. At the same time, Inquisitor Frank, vigorously driving his Arbit's power armor, shot forward like a missile that had just been launched. He crashed straight into the depths of a deserted building, then continued to rush rapidly towards the top floor. Dong dong dong. About a dozen seconds later, inside a dim room filled with the smell of burning flames, Peter, with incredibly nimble movements, crashed in through the broken window first. As countless shards of window frames flew around, he immediately spotted several human heretics turning their guns. Without a second thought, the two web shooters on his wrists fired forward. Hey, good evening everyone. Aren't you asleep yet? Peter, subconsciously being talkative, stomped hard on the dusty, cluttered ground. Using the strong spider silk already wrapped around one heretic, he leapt forward, his feet slashing through the air, heavily stomping on the front of the opponent's chest. Immediately afterwards, as the sound of the enemy's bones cracking and a miserable scream echoed around, a strong leg, with a conventional force of nearly 10 tons, swept fiercely through the air, forcefully striking the neck of another heretic. Dong dong dong. Just then, accompanied by a series of heavy footsteps from outside the dim room, Frank, wearing his Arbit's power armor, also quickly charged in from the door. He raised the storm bolter and boarding shield in his metal gauntlets. Without any hesitation, he fired terrifying explosive rounds at the other heretics in his field of vision who were pulling the triggers of their lasguns. Boom boom boom. In an instant, the roaring explosive rounds caused those extremely fragile human bodies to explode, countless pieces of flesh and foul-smelling internal organs flying everywhere in the air, covering the surrounding walls. Even though Peter, who happened to be within the area, reacted incredibly quickly, he was still splattered with a lot of foul-smelling blood on his hair. By the Primarch, my dear instructor, we won't be able to find a clean water source to take a bath in for a while. Secure, crisis averted. Enemy targets have been completely annihilated. At this moment, the Inquisitor Frank's deep voice completely drowned out Peter's complaining. He first glanced warily at the surrounding room structure before slowly lowering the storm bolter and boarding shield in his gauntlets. Peter, check the surrounding corpses to see if there are any survivors. Frank, with a solemn expression, gave the order to Peter, who was jumping in place, trying to shake the blood out of his hair, without turning his head. Then, he drove his Arbit's power armor to the whirlwind missile launchers standing near the window, with only the launch devices remaining. Even if the factory serial numbers of these whirlwind missiles have been carefully polished clean, the weapons and equipment produced by the major Forge Worlds and mobile hives have essential differences in terms of paint color and model style. Frank muttered to himself, driving his Arbit's power armor to kneel on one knee. He repeatedly checked the model styles of these launch devices. Peter, I have already confirmed here that these are all weapons and equipment produced by mobile hives. Do you have any findings on your side? Frank, frowning, quickly got up from the ground, driving his Arbit's power armor to turn around and ask Peter, who was not far away. Instructor, even with my newbie experience from my first internship, I can roughly judge that we are in big trouble this time. Look, this seems to be the latest model of the Terra 2 pattern lasgun. Plus the appearance of the whirlwind missiles, so how did these heretics obtain these weapons and equipment? There's also a question, we didn't discover their traces before, why did they suddenly attack us? Did they think they are dying too slowly? The instructor's question made Peter's youthful face lose any trace of contempt or negligence. He casually grabbed a handful of damaged lasguns from a pile of flesh and blood with his strong spider silk, then shook his head in Frank's direction. Peter. Alert, someone's coming. At this moment, Inquisitor Frank had not yet replied to Peter's words. The expression on his face immediately changed. Chirp chirp chirp. The next second, two scorching red beams of light, with power comparable to a melta, suddenly penetrated a wall of the dim room, sweeping towards Peter and Frank's direction with overwhelming force. Peter, his face tense, reacted incredibly quickly, jumping back and forth in midair. He even hid directly behind Frank's Arbit's power armor. Immediately afterwards, Frank, unflustered, quickly raised the storm bolter in his gauntlet and pulled the trigger towards the wall. Boom boom boom. Explosive rounds, each emitting a piercing roar, continuously penetrated the wall with flying debris. It also abruptly stopped the scorching red beam of light that the unknown enemy had just swept over. However, at this moment, just as Frank, with a cold expression, intended to drive his Arbit's power armor to charge forward and quickly approach the enemy's location, a shout from behind the broken wall temporarily weakened the dangerous atmosphere here. Strange friends, don't shoot, we're allies. We are mutants belonging to the X-Men patrol team. My identification number is 002345, my teammate's identification number is 033123. At this moment, Frank, hearing the other party's words, did not lower his gun at all. Peter, who had subconsciously widened his eyes, couldn't help but carefully poke his head out from behind the Arbit's power armor and repeatedly peered around. I am Inquisitor Frank Castle, serial number 0001. The other person is the Inquisitor's intern apprentice, Peter Parker, temporary serial number 0099. I am now, in my capacity as Inquisitor, ordering you to stand out immediately, and my suggestion is that your movements should be cautious, so as not to cause unnecessary trouble and misunderstanding. After all, my bolter has no eyes. Frank, with a cold expression, said in a deep voice to the mutants who were still hiding in the shadows. Caw, caw, caw. Shortly after, with the subtle sounds of several pairs of feet crushing stone tiles, a mutant with special goggles on his face, and a mutant resembling a blue-skinned demon, slowly appeared in Frank and Peter's field of vision from the entrance of the room, with their hands raised in a gesture of weakness. Inquisitor, I am Scott, the leader of the 4th Squad of the X-Men patrol team, and this is my teammate, Nightcrawler Wagner. Our team was previously tracking a group of heretics trying to blow up the mobile hive, but accidentally discovered your traces and decided to come and see. We were just attracted by the explosion of the whirlwind missile. We have no malice towards you, just because we didn't understand the situation, we rashly launched an attack. The mutant captain named Cyclops Scott said to Inquisitor Frank in a solemn tone. After the other party's voice fell, Frank, who had been quietly looking at the other party for a while, slowly put down the storm bolter and boarding shield in his palm. He took a deep breath and said to the two mutants who had also relaxed in front of him. According to the regulations of the Legion, an Inquisitor has authority far above your X-Men patrol team, so I did not notify and register my identity to your side in advance. Regarding Frank's explanation, Cyclops, who slightly shook his head, secretly scanned the bloody environment around him. He asked hesitantly, now that we know we are on the same side, we are much more at ease. We are also afraid that outsiders beyond our control will cause trouble for us. After all, you also know that the security environment here is already chaotic enough. Inquisitor, excuse me for asking, did you have any unexpected discoveries here? Captain Scott, is it? I would like to ask you a question first. How much do you know about the resident Inquisitor in your area? At this moment, Frank, whose face did not show any expression changes, asked the other party again directly. Cyclops Scott was slightly stunned at first, and then he said thoughtfully, As far as I know, your Inquisitor sequence rarely interacts with our X-Men. After all your investigations and actions are responsible to the higher-ups. I have only seen that Inquisitor a few times, but the impression he left on me was quite profound. Because from the position of the exposed head alone, he doesn't look like a normal human being, more like a pumpkin head with flames burning inside. Pumpkin Lantern, Mad Jack, serial number 0088, was a super-powered villain I recruited into the Inquisitors. He is good at fire magic and illusions. I gave him a chance to atone for his sins because he didn't stain his hands with human lives. Frank, who faintly sighed, said. But now, I suspect that the resident Inquisitor colluded with a weapon manufacturing department in a mobile hive, stealing a large number of weapons and equipment belonging to the Legion and secretly selling them to these heretics. Because only the Inquisitor's authority can do similar things, and no one can detect it. Of course, this is just my one-sided suspicion, and the specific situation and truth still need us to continue investigating. At this moment, Frank's words temporarily plunged Cyclops Scott into silence. Even if according to the handling procedures, all the consequences of this matter have nothing to do with the X-Men patrol team. But the duty and responsibility as an X-Men still made him say. Inquisitor, my X-Men patrol team is willing to help you investigate this matter. After all, after the heretics obtain a large number of weapons and equipment, it is we who will eventually encounter fatal dangers. Okay, then thank you for the help of your X-Men, Captain Scott, you two are temporarily under my command now. Inquisitor Frank accepted the two people in front of him into his and Peter's action team without any hesitation. And the reason why he told the other party these intelligence information. It was also to obtain help from the X-Men patrol team. Before collecting conclusive evidence of the Inquisitor's rebellion, he, the Inquisitor, had no reason to mobilize more Defense Force guards or Astartes to come here. Subsequently, Peter, who quickly revealed his figure from behind the mortal power armor, introduced himself to Scott and Wagner. At the same time, he once again led the two people to carefully examine the surrounding scene environment. Soon after, with the arrival of midnight, on the more dim and dilapidated streets, Peter, who was carrying the huge weapon box again, and Scott and others focused their attention on Frank, who was communicating with Cortana. The next moment, Frank, who had finished the communication, said to the three people around him. He has already obtained all the authority to track the resident Inquisitor, Pumpkin Lantern, Mad Jack from above. As long as the other party has not left the European continent, then he can 100% find the other party's location. So, this action team led by Inquisitor Frank quickly began running and jumping on the city streets. And as they continued to rush towards the direction where those mobile hives were located. In the depths of the thick night, bursts of explosions and flames faintly coming from the surrounding cities, and even the ear-piercing screams constantly released by superpowers, also repeatedly bloomed in everyone's ears. Perhaps noticing the doubts revealed by Peter, the Inquisitor's apprentice beside him. Cyclops Scott, who was quickly moving his feet, explained to the short-haired boy without looking back. Almost every city area with a mobile hive has a similar situation at night. Even in the eyes of the Legion and the mutant high level. Their series of methods are to allow all people to have a better quality of life and a safe environment. But there are still many people who choose to join the ranks of heretics or supervillains, carrying out increasingly blind resistance movements in the name of chaos and freedom. And this situation will generally continue until the arrival of the Astartes, slaughter, so that it can be stable for a considerable period of time. Soon after, the agile crowd came to the bottom of a mobile hive with an extremely large volume. When Frank successfully passed the detection procedures of those intelligence control legions responsible for guarding the mobile hive with the identity of an Inquisitor. The next moment, everyone entered the bottom of the mobile hive. They finally found a hidden residence of the resident Inquisitor, Pumpkinhead, Mad Jack. At this moment, Frank, who was desperately driving the mortal power armor, kicked open the metal door in front of him with a magnetic boot without any hesitation. However, with the metal door crashing down inward, What clearly appeared in everyone's field of vision was a charred skeleton wrapped inside a melted and damaged power armor, and a messy scene of indoor fighting. The Inquisitor, Pumpkinhead, Mad Jack, who was suspected of rebellion, had already been dead for a long time. Buzz buzz buzz. The scanning sound from the handheld auspex kept ringing in everyone's ears. However, faced with the charred corpse of a resident Inquisitor who seemed to have suffered great pain and torment, even the talkative Peter didn't make a sound. At this moment, the agile and nimble him was using tough spider silk glued between the metal walls and the ceiling. The whole person was conducting a reconnaissance scan of the scene of death like an acrobat. Soon after, Frank, with a solemn expression, used a series of complex data on the handheld auspex, combined with the situation on the scene that could be carefully observed with his sight. He began a simple analysis to Cyclops Scott and others standing outside the door. Currently, Inquisitor, Jack-o'-lantern, Mad Jack is confirmed to have died from the intense burning of high-temperature flames. However, the energy spectrum that can be detected by the handheld auspex shows that the source of the high-temperature flames belongs to his own flame trick. However, even Peter, the most inexperienced rookie among the people present, would not easily believe that a tenacious Inquisitor would commit suicide so simply. Do you think this looks like an infighting caused by uneven distribution of spoils? Or a simple silencing? Frank took a deep breath and suddenly asked Cyclops Scott and others in front of him. It must not be that simple. We have just noticed that the weapons and equipment produced by the Mobile Hive City have been leaked to heretics. The only resident Inquisitor who is suspected is dead. Isn't this too strange? Your Excellency Inquisitor, can we now check how long the other party has been dead? Cyclops Scott raised a palm and rubbed his chin. He shook his head and asked Frank in front of him. According to the handheld auspex, in my personal experience with corpses, he has been dead for at least 24 hours. That is to say, Mad Jack was already dead before you and I arrived in this area. And because this location belongs to a resident Inquisitor's hidden residence, or a safe house, the Mobile Hive City Committee did not arrange any monitoring equipment nearby, so this is indeed a good place to kill people and silence them. Frank drove the mortal power armor and put the handheld auspex into the large weapon box. He casually picked up a standard issue bolter filled with ammunition, grinned coldly, and said in a low voice. And hearing Frank's words, Cyclops Scott was silent for a moment first. Then he turned his head and stared at the Inquisitor's tall back and said, Your Excellency Inquisitor, one of my teammates has a very special mutant ability that can temporarily restore anything that happened in a place within a certain period of time. I want her to check the scene to see if she can find any clues. What do you think? Regarding Cyclops Scott's suggestion, Frank, with a stern expression, agreed without any hesitation. In my capacity as Inquisitor, I allow you to mobilize more helpers. We do need some extra technical means to solve the problem. Seconds ago, the death of resident Inquisitor, Mad Jack, and the suspicion of rebellion have been reported to Cortana. A company of Astartes is on standby on the European sky carrier, ready to support any actions we take next. As soon as Frank finished speaking, Cyclops Scott quickly communicated in a low voice with Nightcrawler Wagner standing beside him. And Nightcrawler Wagner, who looks like a blue-skinned demon, suddenly turned into wisps of blue mist that kept dissipating outward. Disappeared from everyone's sight in the blink of an eye. Wagner's mutant ability is blink movement, which is a kind of teleportation ability. He will bring my patrol team back as soon as possible. At this moment, as if feeling the scrutiny of other people's eyes, Cyclops Scott explained to Frank and Peter. At this moment, Peter, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly stared at Frank's tall body. He stammered and said, Instructor, I have had an idea since just now that I wanted to bring up, but I was afraid of incurring your reprimand, saying that I was nosy. Peter, speak straight, don't hesitate. Frank drove the mortal power armor and moved a step, and said to Peter in a deep voice. Okay, Instructor, then I'll just say it straight. Why do we preemptively think that this Pumpkinhead Inquisitor must be a traitor? Is it possible that he just discovered the truth about something, or found some clues, that completely brought about his death? And, do you remember, instructor, what exactly were those heretics who attacked us with whirlwind missiles not long ago for? They can entangle with the X-Men patrol team here for so long. They must be a group of more life-cherishing and cunning bad guys, but why would they suddenly launch an attack and attract our attention? You must know that in the normal person's thinking logic, only the legendary Astartes wear power armor. Could it be that those heretics just wanted to test the latest weapons and equipment they obtained? To deal with Astartes with just a dozen whirlwind missiles and several laser guns, isn't this purely courting death? Unless they were originally waiting for us. Or waiting for the arrival of the next Inquisitor. At this moment, Peter's words slowly echoed in the ears of the other two. Cyclops Scott, with his arms crossed, took a deep breath. He asked Peter in the direction before Frank could speak. But Peter, even if your idea is correct, and there is indeed a mastermind behind the scenes guiding and manipulating all our actions, then what is the purpose of the other party going to so much trouble? The unfortunate death of a resident Inquisitor will definitely not be easily dismissed by the higher-ups. Even if the so-called mastermind has some great plan, as long as the Astartes company comes, what waves can the other party make? You must know that we have always had zero tolerance for heretics and even aliens that pose a threat. Even if we pay a great price in casualties, we must eliminate the threat. However, at this moment, as Cyclops Scott's words were not completely finished. Rumble. An extremely dull roar and tremor suddenly transmitted from the position under everyone's feet. Immediately afterwards, a sudden sense of weightlessness suddenly enveloped everyone's bodies. And even Peter, who was panicked, could perceive that the entire vast mobile hive city seemed to be slowly falling towards the ground below. If someone were standing on the dilapidated buildings of the surrounding cities, or peering out from inside other mobile hive cities, then it would be obvious that a massive mobile hive city, originally standing on the ground, was slowly sinking into the soft, collapsing depths below. Buzz buzz buzz. The next second, accompanied by a buzzing sound from the air, an Astartes company, fully armed, rapidly arrived at the periphery of the sinking mobile hive city through a series of teleportation barriers. Approximately several minutes later, it seemed that the underground space had reached some kind of limit. The entire mobile hive city, buried about halfway, completely stopped moving. And the Astartes, having completed a brief communication exchange on the communication channel, without any hesitation, launched a surprise attack on the still magnificent, mountain-like mobile hive city ahead. At the same time, due to the extremely violent tremors and the sudden sinking accident, the lights at the bottom of the mobile hive city flickered repeatedly. Frank, with an increasingly solemn expression, first activated his mortal power armor and stood up abruptly. Then, he asked Laser Eyes Scott and the shaken Peter about their injuries. After Frank received a brief reply from the other two that they were unharmed, he quickly gave Peter the bolter and power sword from the large weapons crate. When it was Laser Eyes Scott's turn, he simply solemnly pointed to the special visor above his face, refusing the offered weapons and equipment. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a series of low roars and chaotic footsteps, constantly echoing in everyone's ears, repeatedly came from the depths of the dimly lit passage corridor. This made Frank and the others feel even more heavy-hearted. It seemed that it wasn't just a mere resident Inquisitor who had encountered trouble, but that the entire mobile hive city had undergone an unknown change. You must know that the maximum load of each mobile hive city is about 5 million people. Even if the living space of the mobile hive city is currently too abundant, then at least 1 million people live inside. Dong dong dong. Just at this moment, shadowy figures of humanoid monsters wearing hive city work clothes, their entire bodies almost twisted and deformed, appeared within Frank and the others' line of sight. When Frank, with wide eyes, relying on his past experience, determined that these hive city workers were completely beyond saving, he immediately had Peter, who was holding a bolter, and Laser Eyes Scott prepared to defend their position in the room, which was originally a crime scene, for a short period of time. After all, such a large-scale unknown accident had occurred in a mobile hive city. The surrounding mobile hive cities or the Gemini Island base must have already learned of the incident. Boom boom boom. The next second, the roar of a large number of bolter explosions completely erupted in the passage corridor at the bottom of this mobile hive city. And Frank, holding a bolter, without turning his head, pulled out a chainsword with a roaring engine from the large weapons crate beside him. He quickly activated his mortal power armor and launched a ruthless, bloody slaughter against the nearest and more numerous humanoid monsters. Immediately following, Peter and Laser Eyes Scott, standing in another passage direction. After the two exchanged a glance, they gritted their teeth and launched a terrifying massacre against the constantly surging humanoid monsters. In an instant, the constantly exploding bolter fire and the thick red scorching beams from Laser Eyes Scott's eyes flew back and forth in the passage corridor, repeatedly cutting and blocking the advance of the humanoid monsters. Chi. Just at this moment, in the depths of the surging monster tide in front of Frank, a series of fine sounds of sharp weapons constantly cutting through fragile flesh suddenly rang out. The next second, a strong man holding two silver-long knives, wearing a black trench coat that fluttered in the wind, and with sunglasses on his dark-skinned face, completely appeared in Frank's field of vision. "Blade, why are you here?" At this moment, Frank, with an increasingly solemn expression, desperately activated his mortal power armor and launched a charge forward. The roaring chainsword, tightly gripped in his palm, forcibly cleaved a path, creating an opportunity for Blade, who was still fighting, to escape. Sure enough, the other party, whose entire body was covered in viscous blood, stepped nimbly on the surrounding metal walls. The whole person, like a black bird spreading its wings and soaring, heavily crossed over a large number of humanoid monsters, directly jumping to a position behind Frank. However, at this time, Frank, whose magnetic boots repeatedly stepped on the corpses scattered all over the ground, returning to the battle line, also firmly locked the bolter in his other palm on Blade's head. While repeatedly cleaving at the humanoid monsters that were surging forward, he asked in a deep voice without turning his head. "Blade, you only have one chance to answer my question. Tell me, why did you appear in this mobile hive city? What changes have occurred to these hive city residents? Did you also participate in this?" At this moment, hearing Frank's inquiry and the roars of countless humanoid monsters in his ears. For this old friend he had dealt with several times in the past. Blade, who had just straightened his broad back, flicked the black trench coat covered in viscous blood, and without any concealment, said in a deep voice to the other party's back. "Inquisitor Mad Jack invited me in a private capacity to investigate something inside your mobile hive city." He had always suspected that a supernatural force was repeatedly haunting the mobile hive city, attempting to spread fear and faith among a large number of people. As for what you asked about what changes have occurred to these mentally unsound, physically mutated people, based on my past experience, it's because their food and fresh water have been mixed with a large amount of special bone ash formed after the death of supernatural creatures for a long time. In other words, they have been contaminated by the resentment left behind by supernatural creatures due to death. To be honest, your ruling procedures for this continent in recent years have been too harsh. It's not just a matter of so-called heretics. The ultimate birth of the mobile hive cities has also led to many supernatural creatures hidden in human cities being wiped out one by those Astartes called destroyer angels. You wouldn't naively think that choosing to break these supernatural customs that have continued from ancient times to the present would not suffer any backlash from the other party, would you? Blade's low words clearly caused Frank's thick arm, which was waving a melee weapon back and forth, to pause slightly, but the muzzle of the bolter was re-aimed at the direction from which the humanoid monsters were attacking. Perhaps, this is just because the Lamenter's chapter's style of doing things is too merciful. The Astartes' kill count is not enough. But then, without turning his head, Frank still didn't hesitate to launch an even more bloody and violent slaughter against the humanoid monsters in front of him. Just at this moment, Blade, who let out a sigh, was just about to grip the silver long knife in his palm and join this resistance against the humanoid monsters. But he suddenly noticed the fresh blood on the metal floor that was slowly rippling with traces of colored ripples. "Wait, I seem to have overlooked something more important. Blade, frowning tightly, abruptly raised his dark-skinned face. He suddenly shouted loudly at Frank's tall back. Frank, did you call for Astartes support before? Immediately contact them to stop the slaughter, and don't cause large-scale casualties. The special bone ash of supernatural creatures plus a large amount of human blood is the best spellcasting medium in the magic world. I now suspect that someone wants to use the slaughter you are best at and the sacrificed civilians to conduct a super large-scale sacrificial ritual. At the same time, deep beneath the earth, far deeper than the sunken mobile hive city. Amidst the swaying reflections of countless magical lights and burning torches. Whish! Inside the completely sealed mine, a continuous sound of flowing water could be faintly heard. The next second, a slender, completely bare foot slowly stepped out of a bronze magic cauldron filled with the blood of countless virgins. And as a large amount of invisible magical power surged back and forth, a blood-red energy robe, woven from even more ancient and wild primal magic, appeared out of thin air. Then, it quickly enveloped the tall figure of the owner of those bare feet. My poor servants, tell me, to which chapter has the story we planned been woven? A lazy voice, seemingly filled with endless temptation, slowly echoed in the surrounding cold air. He, our most noble and wonderful mistress. Currently, the development of all stories is proceeding according to your expectations. Those terrifying Astartes giants have followed their usual practice and launched a bloody massacre of the Hive City's population. Countless wronged souls suffering from death, and the majestic power generated by the interweaving and fusion of human blood containing the original power of magic and the remains and ashes of supernatural creatures, is also rapidly filling the great steel altar you have set up based on that mobile hive city. As soon as the other party's voice fell, hundreds of goblin creatures with almost completely exposed green skin grinned and roared in unison. While kneeling down slowly with extremely humble expressions towards the ancient witch in front of them. Isn't this the ultimate goal of you losers who have been completely forced to a dead end by humans, to summon me back from a distant extra-dimensional space? However, in my opinion, the current number of sacrifices is far from enough, and the Astartes' killing progress is too slow. At this moment, the ancient witch named Morgan Le Fay seemed to have never looked directly at the goblin creatures crawling on the ground. With a scarlet light flashing in her eyes, she, like a ruler who has reascended to the world, moved her bare feet with an air of arrogance. And every time the other party took a step forward, a goblin creature with an increasingly frenzied expression would quickly place its entire thin body under one of the other party's bare feet. As if only this method and attitude could prevent any dust or dirt from defiling their most noble mistress. Soon after, goblin meat pads with bloody green flesh moving back and forth in the rough mine brought Morgan Le Fay to a stone gate covered with ancient runes. Rumble. When the ancient witch, whose expression was always indifferent, waved her white hand lightly, the heavy stone gate in front of her slowly opened with a roar. A larger underground cave appeared very clearly in the other party's field of vision. At the same time, countless supernatural creatures silently waiting in the dim light subconsciously turned their eyes. Locking their eyes, filled with desire and redemption, firmly on the ancient witch's graceful body. Among them are groups of evil centaurs holding new laser weapons. There are ogre trolls, fat and strong, with several pieces of blood-stained carapace hanging in front of their round bellies, and chainsaw weapons in their large hands. There are also many hungry werewolves covered in dark hair, and atavistic vampires flapping their tattered wings with thermal detonators wrapped around their waists. Even among many tall and burly ancient treants, groups of petite and weak glowing creatures with fragmentation grenades tied to them repeatedly flashed into existence. In addition, a large number of transparent bodies emitted colorful lights, terrifying spirits wandering back and forth in midair. Undead creatures with only a yellowed skeleton left and a power sword on their shoulders, and even human believers such as black magic wizards wearing black robes and pale faces that did not look like living people, also appeared vaguely among countless supernatural creatures. Ha. At this moment, the ancient witch, squinting her eyes and scanning the supernatural creatures a few times, seemed to chuckle. She continued to move forward unhurriedly with her head held high and chest out. The countless supernatural creatures around seemed to have seen a true savior. While lowering their heads to make way for a wide passage, they also quickly knelt down to the other party who was stepping on goblin meat pads. By the grace, great Morgan, save us. Merciful ancient witch master, help us regain our lost homeland. Please have mercy and bless us, these poor creatures who have nowhere to go. In an instant, the constant and undulating low voices echoed back and forth in the depths of the entire underground cave, and even gradually converged into an echo wave that could not be ignored. However, at this time, as the ancient witch Morgan Le Fay finally arrived on a huge stone platform where all supernatural creatures could clearly see her, all the sounds seemed to disappear in an instant, as if they had never existed at all. My poor children, you have suffered. You were originally great creatures in myths and legends, and terrifying monsters that the human race should have worshipped, but now you have been reduced to this. You should learn how to resist and fight, and enjoy the suppression and contempt of your ancestors for the human race in countless past years. You should proudly stand on the earth, admiring the starry sky at night and the sun during the day with incomparable reverence, instead of being like you are now, like rotten rats soaked in the gutter, hiding timidly in the depths of the earth. Of course, I also know that you are completely frightened by those human giants called Astartes. It is true that their human race has mastered technology and magic over countless years, and has even gradually possessed the will and courage to fight against monsters, and has grown into the true master of this world. But today, I am here to formally announce to you, all supernatural creatures and anyone forgotten by the world must once again unite and unite. Together, let us send out our roar to those evil and brutal human races. We must use our lives and blood to reclaim our own homeland. At this moment, Morgan Le Fay's words seemed to completely ignite the long-hidden anger and desire of all supernatural creatures. Temporarily abandoning their timidity and fear, they raised the stolen weapons and equipment in their palms one after another, and issued a more intense and impassioned roar towards the direction where the ancient witch was. Children, I have personally witnessed your determination to fight the human race to the end, and I have also heard your courage to fight to the death, but even these are completely insufficient. We need a force that can achieve victory, a terrifying force that even the strong of the human race cannot completely resist. However, fortunately, this power has been found by me, an ancient witch who has survived from ancient times and has been exiled to a distant extra-dimensional space. Now, a great god who is incomparably generous with power is officially standing behind you and me. As long as you sincerely recite her prayer, like me, and shout her honorable name that will soon resound throughout the universe, you can completely obtain the great power to fight the human race to the death. At this moment, the ancient witch, as if she had just enjoyed the gaze of countless worshipful eyes, suddenly changed the subject. She slightly widened her blood-filled, exquisite eyes, with a bloodthirsty and charming smile on the corner of her mouth. Without any hesitation, she shouted loudly to the increasingly excited supernatural creatures below. Now, my poor children, monster citizens who have suffered from human torment, let us recite the prayer of this great god together. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. Blood for the blood god. In an instant, a hungry werewolf with slurred speech subconsciously shouted out the first half of the prayer. Its eyes gradually turning blood red, it suddenly turned its wolf head covered with dark hair. Sharp teeth pierced into the fat belly of an ogre troll and tore fiercely. Skulls for the skull throne. The ogre troll being repeatedly torn by the werewolf did not show any pain. The other party first roared out the second half of the prayer with a frenzied expression. Then, a huge palm had grabbed a forest sprite fluttering back and forth in front of it, forcefully pinching the other party, who was screaming sharply, into a bloody mess that splashed everywhere. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. At this moment, all the supernatural creatures present were shouting the slogan belonging to the blood god Khorne. Completely involuntarily, they fought desperately towards each other. Heh, roar, kill, pour sacrifices, sacrifice more souls and lives to the great blood god. And also guide a very conspicuous path of descent for the great demons under the blood god's seat. At this moment, strands of blood-colored light were constantly being quickly gathered by Morgan Le Fay from the corpses of supernatural creatures and scarlet blood all over the ground. The next second, with the white hand of the other party waving back and forth, a terrifying blood-colored light that had been brewing for a long time also quickly penetrated the obstruction of a large amount of soil and stone, and completely poured into the interior of the mobile hive city located directly above the underground cave. Rumble. And as the entire mobile hive city, which had sunk deep into the ground, continued to emit violent tremors and terrifying roars, an almost sky-covering blood-red beam of light instantly soared into the sky from the earth, even reflecting the entire dark night sky into a blood-red color. On the snow-covered Twins Islands, standing inside the base's main hall, Primarch Roche watched intently at the large screens in front of him. The Lamenters, who were originally launching cleanup operations on the upper levels of the mobile hive cities, suddenly erupted in inhuman, furious roars from within their helmets. Blood for the blood god. Skulls for the skull throne! Quote. For the Primarch. Then, the black and white power armor on these towering figures was completely stained blood red, transforming them into Chaos Space Marines. They continued to wield their chain weapons, slaughtering every humanoid living creature they could find. At the same time, on another large screen, a blood-red pillar of light soaring into the dark night sky was clearly displayed within his field of vision. Respected Primarch, the Lamenter's third company is completely annihilated. They appear to have been completely corrupted by chaos. Cortana, do you need to tell me that? At this moment, Primarch Roche, taking a deep breath through his nose and mouth, forcibly suppressed the strong urge to slam his adamantium hand heavily on the vibranium round table. He paused for a moment. Then, with a solemn expression, he continuously issued orders to the shipboard AI, Cortana, standing beside him. Immediately mobilize all mobile hive cities in that vicinity, deploy all weapon arrays on board, and completely surround the location of the Chaos incursion in the shortest amount of time. Have all planetary defense forces immediately reorganize their units, mobilize all available armored vehicles and flight squadrons, and proceed to the front lines of the battlefield at once. Notify the Ordo Malleus, tell Tony and Thor to lead all superheroes capable of flight to provide support at maximum speed. Notify Kamar Taj, have Strange's mage units assemble and stand by, ready to assist more forces in joining the battle. Also, contact David, have him teleport back from Africa as soon as possible. The matter of suppressing Wakanda can be put off until later. At this moment, Primarch Rock's voice had barely faded, accompanied by a low, rumbling sound from not far behind him. Iron Man David, sitting inside his hovering seat, instantly materialized from the teleportation barrier, his tall figure in the form of a black metal skeleton. My lord, long time no see. Cortana has already sent me all the specific data. I will now take over command of the entire battlefield. The Lamenter's first company, currently stationed at the Twins Islands base, and the second company, located in other regions of Europe, were rapidly heading to the front lines to converge, greatly aided by the Thunderhawk transports and teleportation technology. 8 stormtrooper companies are also preparing for battle and are ready to depart at any time. In addition, General Baka, who is currently visiting the Asian region in the name of the Legion, will lead the remaining 3 skycarriers to provide fire support over the battlefield. However, is it necessary to deploy the 2 skycarriers located in the African region in the same way? Iron Man David, slightly shaking his metal skull head, jumped down from the hovering seat. His eye sockets flashing blue, he first bowed respectfully to Primarch Rock's towering back, and then quickly spoke. Primarch Roche, driving his volcano pattern power armor, shifted his magnetic boots slightly, and after carefully staring at Iron Man David, he asked in a deep voice. David, where is Sevatar? Didn't he say he was going to find you earlier? My lord, your brother, the clone, has already taken over the command authority of the Intelligent Control Legion. It was because the task of besieging Wakanda was entrusted to him that I was able to free myself and return. Iron Man David replied without any hesitation. Then let him stay there for now. The two skycarriers also don't need to be mobilized for the time being, unless some special situations that are difficult to resolve arise in the European region's chaos incursion. At this moment, Roche slowly raised a dark red adamantium hand and abruptly drew out the green glowing blood scythe from the storage page. He was just about to order Iron Man David, who was standing beside him, to activate the base's internal teleportation function. To throw his entire person directly to the front lines of the battlefield. The next second, Roche, suddenly remembering something, immediately used the power armor's internal communication device to contact Wolf and Roche. Wolf Cub, where are you? Your old boss is causing us trouble again. Brother, I'm in the circular plaza. I just received Reditus, who has returned, and Tiberius, who came to check on the situation. I'm asking them how my Wolfen brothers are. Wolfen Rock's voice had barely faded. Primarch Roche, frowning slightly, ordered the other party. Continue to have Yukari open the teleportation gate to the Primarch's Legion, and directly mobilize the Karkarodon's Great Company and the Raven Guard Great Company over here, and let the Blood Ravens Great Company temporarily lead the movements of the Primarch's fleet. Brother, is it necessary to bring in so many people? Can't the local forces handle a chaos incursion? At this moment, Wolf and Roche, on the other side of the communication device, seemed to feel somewhat puzzled by Primarch Rock's request to mobilize the Astartes manpower in the fleet. However, Primarch Roche didn't explain too much. He just continued in a low voice. Listen to me, brother, try to mobilize more manpower. I've had a vague premonition since just now that this chaos incursion might be different. Your old boss is very likely going to play a big scene on the homeworld. Alright, I'll listen to you. Primarch Rock's voice had just fallen. Wolf and Roche, located in the circular plaza, ended the communication without any hesitation. He drove his power armor, turned around, and shouted loudly to Yukari, the Karkarodon's librarian standing not far away, and Angel Stormcaller, the rune priest with a solemn expression. Yukari, you are still responsible for opening the teleportation gate connecting to the Primarch's fleet. This time, we need to mobilize two great companies of Astartes over here. Even if you vomit blood, you have to grit your teeth and persevere. Brother Angel, you are responsible for contacting Fenris and asking if the Great Hunt is over there, and see how many space wolves can be mobilized. The more, the better. Great Deceiver Lucas, Captain Tiberius, you guys go find the Primarch first. I'll be there after I finish things here. Rumble. Just below the bright night sky, which was completely reflected in blood red. One incredibly massive mobile hive city after another began to emit the low, rumbling sound of metal colliding. The next moment, relying on the giant mechanical legs gradually extending from the bottom of each mobile hive city. These vast mechanical creations, resembling metal mountains, began to surround the mobile hive city that was constantly erupting with a towering blood-red pillar of light at a movement speed that wasn't considered slow. Soon after, 12 massive mobile hive cities, spaced about 20 kilometers apart from each other, heavily landed in the surrounding locations centered on the fallen hive city, and then rapidly flipped out a large number of weapon arrays from within their towering metal shells. At the same time, a force of Intelligent Control Legion units, rapidly released from within the mobile hive cities, quickly launched the first assault operation towards the direction of the fallen hive city. Chi. Streams of crimson laser cannons, as thick as water buckets, and a large number of whirlwind missiles drawing clear launch trajectories in the blood-red night sky. Repeatedly rising from the densely packed weapon arrays atop the 12 mobile hive cities, they poured relentless fire upon the sinking hive city, which was continuously releasing a massive blood-red pillar of light, like a dense rain. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this moment, a visible, super-large void shield suddenly enveloped the outermost perimeter of the sinking hive city. With an incredibly effortless defensive posture, it easily intercepted the scorching beams of countless laser cannons and swiftly diverted the explosive fire of numerous whirlwind missiles. Rumble rumble. Immediately following, amidst the ruins of dilapidated buildings not far from the sinking hive city, One by one, dim cave-ins, collapsing inward, appeared on the battlefield, accompanied by the constant shifting of earth, stone, and rubble. The next second, a large number of supernatural creatures, sifted and blessed through countless bloody battles, their theoretical combat power already comparable to chaos demons, swarmed out like a crimson tide, roaring as they clashed head-on with squads of Astartes machine guard-wielding chainswords. Countless fragments of flesh and blood and mechanical parts began to fly everywhere. The roar of chainswords and the furious howls of supernatural creatures officially heralded a brand new chapter of Chaos's arrival. Pung pung pung. At this moment, accompanied by terrifying sounds in the blood-red night sky, like the beating of a giant heart or the rumble of war drums. The central position of that massive blood-colored pillar of light actually slowly tore open a huge portal in the shape of a corn symbol. Roar roar roar. 8,888 flesh hounds, their massive bodies covered in thick scales, with several pairs of curved horns growing from their heads, were the first to leap out of the portal. Constantly roaring, they crashed heavily onto the ground around the hive city like mobile cannonballs made of demonic flesh. Then, each flesh hound that had just landed quickly flipped over from the sunken crater. Braving the explosive fire of countless whirlwind missiles, they launched an incredibly swift and fierce rapid assault around the battlefield. Rumble rumble. Just at this moment, within the gaps deliberately left by the 12 mobile hive cities, which had already transformed into firepower fortresses for the attacking forces. Circles of large warp gates, several tens of meters in diameter, suddenly appeared above the dilapidated ground on the edge of the battlefield. Immediately following, thousands of metal treads neatly aligned. Leman Russ tanks, with only their thick gun barrels slightly swaying and their powerful engines emitting a violent roar, rapidly charged out of the warp gates like iron walls. For humanity and the Primarch. All tank commanders, suppressive fire, mass charge. At this moment, within the communication channels on the battlefield, the loud roar of Colonel Zemo, the commander-in-chief of the Territorial Defense Forces Armored Formation, rang out. And each Leman Russ tank, its engine emitting a terrifying roar, charged forward like a frenzied iron beast, while launching a relentless barrage of cannon fire at the incoming flesh hounds. They desperately increased their engine power and crashed fiercely into the terrifying chaos demons. Dong dong dong. At the same time, land raiders, with their assault cannons and storm bolter arrays rotating back and forth, also burst out of each warp gate under the cover of a large number of carapace armored mortal warriors. These heavy vehicles immediately used their massive, boxy forms, forcefully filling the gaps left between each mobile hive city completely, without even leaving the slightest gap for any chaos demons. And a large number of mortal warriors, clutching lasguns in their palms, also began to rapidly construct permanent defensive fortifications and more war trenches with the diligent cooperation of more automated servo robots. Obviously, in the long days before the arrival of Chaos, the Territorial Defense Force, whose numbers had already expanded to over 1 million, had gradually developed a set of universal warfare tactics for countering super-powerful enemies. However, at this moment, with the violent collision of a large number of flesh hounds and Leman Russ tank armored formations, as well as the fierce fighting between more supernatural creatures and the controlled army, the deaths and ends of countless lives, also allowed the huge corn symbol-shaped portal to once again spew out new chaos demons. Wah wah wah, accompanied by the chaotic roars constantly echoing throughout the blood-red night sky. 88,888 corn bloodletters, wielding hellblades in their claws, surged out from the depths of the huge portal-like waves of crimson. In squealing and yelling, they had just fallen around the sinking hive city. They immediately started moving their crimson feet, desperately joining the increasingly fierce battlefield. At this moment, what was even more frightening was that, although the huge corn symbol-shaped portal seemed to have temporarily stopped spewing out more chaos demons, 8 vague figures, their bodies as large as hills, wielding huge axe-like heavy weapons, also slowly emerged from the interior of the massive blood-colored pillar of light, as if they would completely coalesce from the portal in the next second. Buzz buzz buzz. Almost at the same time, A large number of void engine roars from the depths of the blood-red night sky directly exposed a massive flying formation composed of hundreds of Thunderhawk gunships. 8 companies of stormtroopers, wearing black and white power armor, wielding storm bolters, arrived above the fierce battlefield. They directly used the disposable grav chutes installed behind their power packs, and heavily fell from midair towards the ground. Subsequently, the stormtroopers, constantly pulling the triggers of their bolters in their palms, also quickly joined the fierce battle against the supernatural creatures and chaos demons. Buying more time for other reinforcements that had not yet arrived in the defensive fortifications of the mortal warriors. At this moment, even the Thunderhawk gunship flying formation, which had quickly changed its flight direction, continuously launched low-altitude strafing runs, trying to kill as many chaos demons as possible. Chi. Soon after, on a patch of open ground on the edge of the battlefield, flashes of fleeting warp barrier light appeared one after another. One by one, the Lamenters, wearing Terminator armor and wielding bolters and melee weapons, quickly revealed their tall Astartes figures. At the same time, grasping the Blood Reaver in his ceramite hand. Primarch Rorschach, his dark red volcanic ring constantly illuminated by the flames of war, also led Tiberius and Lucas to teleport to this place quickly. After they had glanced at the specific situation on the battlefield, Company Captain Tiberius, with his huge physique, immediately led a company of Lamenter's veterans to launch a fierce and terrifying assault towards the center of the chaotic battlefield. And Primarch Rorschach, together with Lucas, led another company of Lamenters, and quickly launched a continuous charge towards the sinking Hive City. Now, everyone, with their incredibly rich combat experience, knew very well. The Chaos Portal, with the sinking Hive City as its main body, must be completely destroyed. Otherwise, there would be no peace on Terra. Chi. The blood scythe in Primarch Rorschach's palm continuously slashed through the surroundings. In the air, constantly illuminated by the soaring blood light and intense war flames, it drew streaks of extremely conspicuous and dazzling green light. In an instant, Khorne bloodletters, bearing their fangs and brandishing hellblades, were easily severed by the blood scythe's sharp edge. They were utterly transformed into a large amount of scattered flesh and blood fragments. However, at this moment, as the Carcharodon's chapter launched continuous and incessant bolter fire, an even greater number of Khorne bloodletters and flesh hounds, as well as many supernatural creatures who had become Khorne worshippers, rapidly converged towards Primarch Rorschach's location, as if specifically to hinder the crowd's surprise attack. Hoo-la-la! A degenerate vampire suddenly spread its wings and soared over from the blood-red sky. Even though it was instantly bombarded into a pile of fragmented rotten meat by countless exploding bolter rounds. However, the severed hand that the opponent was flinging outwards contained an already activated melt-a-bomb. Rumble! An extremely scorching explosive shockwave suddenly enveloped the middle of the charging formation. A Carcharodon's combat squad that didn't have time to take any evasive action became the victims of this suicide attack. The towering bodies of 8 or 9 Astartes were instantly melted into wisps of dissipating ashes by the terrifyingly high-temperature flames. Even their Terminator armor couldn't stop it in the slightest. And Lucas the Great Deceiver, who had just been vigorously hacking and slashing several Khorne bloodletters and flesh hounds, would have followed in the footsteps of those sacrificed brothers if he hadn't had the presence of mind to run a little further forward. By Russ's leg hair, Carcharodon's brothers, spare some manpower to specifically deal with those supernatural creatures. Prioritize killing these Xenos oddities that we've never seen before. Hey, you big tree in front. Don't you dare run away. At this moment, Lucas the Great Deceiver, unable to help but grit his teeth, continuously shook his head full of red hair. He took the lead, wielding the power axe and bolter in his palms. He swiftly launched an even more intense offensive slaughter against those bizarre supernatural creatures around him. Primarch Rorschach, who was slaughtering large numbers of Khorne bloodletters and kicking flesh hounds, also noticed those supernatural creatures with strange abilities. These Xenos, seemingly under the dual blessing of technological weaponry and chaos, were able to pose a considerable threat to the battle-hardened Astartes veterans to a certain extent. Buzz buzz buzz. Without any hesitation, he unfolded a thick arm wrapped in dark red ceramite. One after another, buzzing metallic rings rapidly leapt into the air, swiftly launching extremely precise pinpoint strikes against those conspicuously shaped supernatural creatures. At this moment, even those terrifying wraiths that could use their ability to ignore physical damage to seriously injure or even kill an Astartes were not much stronger than ordinary flesh and blood creatures when facing Primarch Rourke's purple glowing metallic rings. Dong dong dong. Just at this moment, accompanied by heavy footsteps coming from behind the Khorne bloodletters and flesh hounds, Chaos Astartes, clad in blood-red power armor and constantly wielding chain weapons in their hands, quickly revealed their towering figures. These Carcharodons who had been corrupted by Khorne seemed to no longer have any love or worship for their Primarch. Having had their reason and faith forcibly erased, they were merely a group of humanoid containers used to store the power of chaos. Blood for the Blood God, skulls for the Skull Throne. Dong. Primarch Rourke, one of whose magnetic boots heavily stomped on the ground, turned around with force after using the blood scythe in his palm to completely sweep away the surrounding Khorne bloodletters. He suddenly unleashed Shadowstep beneath his feet. His towering body, entirely enveloped in dark shadows, swiftly passed over the heads of a large number of flesh hounds. Subsequently, he heavily landed directly in front of those Chaos Carcharodons. Since Primarch Rourke was the gene father of these Astartes, then he naturally had the obligation and responsibility to personally send these battle brothers on their way, relieving them of the great pain of being accomplices to evil. Chi chi chi. The blood scythe in Primarch Rourke's palm seemed to be vigorously swung into rounds of airtight green storms. One after another, the Chaos Carcharodons, who only had time to wield their chain weapons a few times, were unable to even reactivate their power armor to perform the necessary evasive actions. They were repeatedly slashed through the inside of their towering bodies by Primarch Rourke, who was constantly launching forward charges, completely ending their final lives. Just at this moment, Primarch Rourke, who had just stopped his forward momentum, didn't even have time to take a deep breath. His sharp vision quickly noticed the terrifying evil creatures within that towering blood-colored pillar of light, whose vague figures were becoming increasingly clear. Tyberos, immediately order the Leman Russ tank formations in the center of the battlefield to launch another cluster charge. Target direction: the Sunken Hive. You and I will attempt to cross most of the battlefield from different directions and raid the Sunken Hive. Do not care about the number of Astartes casualties. Khorne's bloodthirsters are about to successfully descend. We only have this one chance to stop their arrival. Otherwise, we will have to pay an even more unbearable price in casualties. Hurry, hurry, hurry. At this moment, Primarch Rourke, whose expression was becoming increasingly cold, completely abandoned the Carcharodons chapter behind him, who were constantly fighting against the Khorne bloodletters and flesh hounds. He strenuously activated the dark red-colored volcano's wrath with all his might. Without looking back, he launched a rapid charge towards the Sunken Hive, which was heavily surrounded by a large number of Khorne bloodletters. Buzz buzz buzz. Primarch Rourke casually summoned buzzing metallic rings to the periphery of his towering body, directly forming a metallic spiral storm, like a toothed meat grinder, that rapidly rotated in the air within a radius of 10 meters. At the same time, far away in the central position of the battlefield, 20 kilometers away, Tyberos, desperately wielding 2 lightning power claws, was like a steel train that had just started, under the sacrificial cover of dozens of Leman Russ tanks willing to accompany him to the end. Launched an even more frantic charge towards the location of the Sunken Hive. Rumble. Just at this moment, in the depths of the blood-red sky, which had originally been continuously illuminated by the towering blood-colored pillar of light, a burst of thunder-like low-pitched sound suddenly erupted outwards. The sound was so loud that it even faintly covered the artillery fire on the battlefield. A robust figure completely wrapped in dazzling lightning, like a humanoid meteorite falling from the sky, traversed the entire battlefield. As the red cloak behind his magic armor violently trembled, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, which was being waved back and forth in his palm, also suddenly erupted with even more powerful and terrifying electric light than before. Thor, who had arrived late, without any hesitation, heavily bombarded the Korn-Sigil teleportation gate located in the center of the towering blood-red pillar of light. Pili Pala. However, after the dazzling lightning that was enough to temporarily blind countless mortal warriors had temporarily dissipated, Primarch Rourke, who was rapidly approaching the bottom of the sunken hive, actually saw a Khorne great axe, with its entire body entwined with a terrifying blood-colored aura, had already stretched out from inside the teleportation gate, forcibly stopping the thunderous force of Thor's hammer Mjolnir. Heh, good strength, but the accuracy is a little off, you should have chopped off my head. At this moment, a low voice that reverberated throughout the battlefield and in everyone's ears slowly said, "A bloodthirster under the blood god Khorne has arrived." Rumble. Thor, wielding Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, in a fierce contest against a Khorne great axe, let out a furious roar that echoed across the battlefield. Strands of incredibly violent, brilliant lightning, mixed with a large amount of dark clouds and gales from the depths of the blood-red night sky, continuously bloomed and converged around the massive portal. At this moment, Thor understood that he had encountered a super powerful enemy he had never seen before, and he intended to fight with all his might. Hung. However, at this moment, a crimson hand, whose trajectory was impossible for ordinary mortals to capture with their eyes, suddenly lashed out from inside the portal. With just one punch, it completely sent Thor, who was brewing a terrifying lightning storm, flying. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Thor, wrapped in strands of lightning from head to toe, crashed through several Thunderhawk transport aircraft that didn't have time to ascend and evade. His entire body rapidly streaked across the sky above most of the battlefield. Only when his incomparably disheveled and towering figure heavily crashed into the interior of a mobile hive city, as massive as a mountain, did his downhill momentum finally come to a complete stop. But at this moment, among the countless people in the midst of the fierce battlefield, whether it was the Primarch Leman Russ, charging towards the direction of the fallen hive city, or the many Astartes or mortal warriors fighting and killing the chaos demons, they didn't have much mind to pay attention to whether Thor was still alive. Because at this moment, everyone had personally witnessed a being with blood-red wings on its back and a pair of curved horns on its head. The greater demon of Khorne, clad in blood-red armor and constantly emitting strands of scarlet killing aura, slowly stepped out from inside the massive portal, officially arriving on the native battlefield. And judging from the burning bone whip that was constantly wrapped around its thick arm, and the Khorne great axe in its other crimson hand, this was none other than one of the most powerful servants of the blood god, the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha. Ah, another new world that is about to become food for my master. No, it should be said, the entire universe. At this moment, the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha, muttering to itself, scanned the fierce battlefield within a radius of dozens of kilometers with a cold gaze full of endless contempt. It suddenly raised its massive head, its gaze capturing those Thunderhawk flight formations in the blood-red night sky that were constantly changing their flight direction and rapidly diving down at a suicidal angle. Rumble. In the next second, the opponent, suddenly spreading its blood-red wings, flew into the air like a massive blood-colored meteorite. After the Thunderhawk transport aircraft repeatedly fired powerful laser cannons and whirlwind missiles, but did not cause much damage to the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha. Boom boom boom. Almost all the oncoming Thunderhawk flight formations were forcibly smashed into a sky-filled dance of exploding firelight by a burning bone whip waving back and forth and the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha's massive size. Chi chi chi. In an instant, a massive beam of impact light, almost completely illuminating the sky above the battlefield, forcibly bombarded the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha's massive body. It also suppressed the rampaging opponent back to the ground battlefield. Immediately afterwards, superheroes wearing colorful mechanical armor, or those who were staying in the blood-red night sky solely by virtue of their own superpowers, followed a super-large Centurion Iron Man armor, about 15 meters tall, and arrived at the edge of the battlefield. Avengers Inquisition, attack. At this moment, the impassioned voice from Tony, the master of the Inquisition, continuously emanated from inside that super-large Centurion Iron Man armor. And dozens of superheroes who could stimulate various energies quickly launched continuous energy attacks towards the most conspicuous target, the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha. At the same time, many superheroes who only had melee combat methods also landed in various parts of the fierce battlefield, as if displaying their own unique abilities. Constantly issuing battle roars, they fought and killed the surrounding chaos demons while trying to rush towards the direction where the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha was located. Roar. However, in the next moment, these superheroes of the native world could be considered to have experienced the terror of the chaos demons for the first time, especially the greater demons of Khorne. The bloodthirster Ka'Bandha, whose massive body withstood countless energy attacks but was almost unscathed, suddenly erupted into an angry roar. The Khorne Great Axe and Burning Bone Whip, tightly gripped in its palm, rapidly swept towards everything around like a bloody storm. Whether it was those Astartes who were launching a death charge towards the greater demon of Khorne, or some superheroes who had quickly arrived nearby. Almost in the blink of an eye, they were violently collided into countless sky-filled fragments of flesh and blood by that sweeping Khorne Great Axe and Burning Bone Whip. And apart from a very few superheroes who could withstand or evade by virtue of the nature of their special superpowers, any human warriors who were on the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha's attack route were unfortunately targeted for slaughter. And seeing the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha, who was slaughtering people like hemp, rampage across the entire chaotic battlefield, Leman Russ tanks, with war-torn traces all over their armor, constantly crushed the surrounding chaos demons. These armored formations, whose numbers had been greatly reduced, began to desperately converge towards the direction of the greater demon of Khorne. Dong dong dong. And the super-large Centurion Iron Man armor, like a titan machine, also forcibly blocked in front of this giant, violent monster under Tony's control. However, as time slowly passed, a large number of mortal warriors and even some superheroes were adversely affected by the very existence of the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha. They gradually fell into a special state of madness for killing. I'm afraid that it is only a step away from true corruption and depravity. Buzz buzz buzz. Just at this moment, flashes of light from the teleportation barrier appeared once again at the edge of the battlefield. The fully armed Carcharodon's Astra and Raven Guard chapter revealed their towering figures wearing power armor in dense and orderly ranks. Ragnar Blackmane, carrying a bolt-breaker warhammer on his thick shoulder armor, also led his wolfen brothers and dozens of space wolves, stood on the ground. And these Astartes who had just arrived on the battlefield did not hesitate to grip the melee weapons in their palms. They quickly activated the power armor. Immediately, they launched a rare Astartes formation charge towards the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha, who was engaged in a Musou-like duel with the super-large Centurion on the chaotic battlefield. Almost at the same time, after successfully breaking through a large number of chaos demons, Primarch Leman Russ and the battle-scarred Tiberius temporarily joined together. They intended to use the large number of melta-bombs and hellfire missiles they had just extracted from the storage page to destroy the mobile hive city in front of them, which had unfortunately become a portal altar. Rumble. However, at this moment, before Primarch Leman Russ and Tiberius could activate the launch device for the hellfire missiles, a terrifying loud noise suddenly came from the position above their heads. Another greater demon of Khorne, also of enormous size, actually succeeded in entering the native world, heavily crashing down towards the ground near the two people. And the even more desperate thing is that the crimson hands of the remaining 6 greater demons of Khorne also suddenly stretched out from inside the massive portal. It seemed that they would completely descend in the next second. Rumble. At this moment, Primarch Rorschach, who had quickly reacted, was planning to forcibly summon the yet-to-recover Celestial Kirin. As the mobile hive city, which had sunk deep into the ground, gradually emitted bursts of uncontrollable shaking, trembling, and rumbling. A scorching laser beam, almost as large in diameter as the blood-red pillar itself, suddenly pierced upwards from the deepest part of the mobile hive city. In the blink of an eye, The entire massive mobile hive city was completely split in two from bottom to top by the scorching laser beam. It was thoroughly cut into two large metal wrecks that were constantly exploding and collapsing. And the terrifying explosions from several Hellfire missiles successfully destroyed the hive city altar, the only foundation supporting the continued existence of the giant portal. Roar! At this moment, those bloodthirster greater demons who were trying to pass through the giant portal and descend upon the local world vaguely emitted terrifying howls filled with unwillingness and rage. Several scarlet hands grasping back and forth in the air disappeared into the dark night sky along with the twisting and swaying massive blood-colored pillar. And with the interruption and disappearance of the large chaos portal. Whether it was the countless chaos demons and supernatural creatures still present, or the two bloodthirster greater demons who had already descended. Their overall combat ability clearly declined, and many chaos demons could even be forcibly blasted to pieces by heavy firepower. Thump, thump, thump. Taking this opportunity, Primarch Rorschach, who had just launched the Hellfire missiles, vigorously activated the volcano's heart power armor. He, as a whole, crashed heavily into the massive body of the bloodthirster greater demon like a speeding steel train. In the next second, using the thick shoulder armor to withstand the powerful chop from the bloodthirster's great axe. The blood side in Primarch Rorschach's palm had already deeply embedded itself into the depths of the opponent's extremely tough chaos demon body, and he dragged it forcefully. Drink. At the same time, Tyberos, wielding two lightning power claws back and forth, was like a metal cannonball just fired from the barrel. His entire tall body suddenly propelled the ancient Terminator armor, leaping up from the ground. Several sharp claw blades of the lightning power claws had already deeply pierced into the chest of the bloodthirster greater demon, stirring forcefully. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Primarch Rorschach, who had strenuously pulled back the blood scythe, activated the special function inside the volcano's heart without any hesitation. And as the terrifying high temperature gradually rose around the dark red power armor, rings of fire impact, with power comparable to Melta explosions, continuously bloomed on the massive body of the bloodthirster greater demon. Even though all bloodthirster greater demons possess extremely terrifying resistance to ranged and energy attacks. But the heavy steps of the opponent constantly retreating backwards and the terrifying wounds that appeared one after another also proved that the fire impact rings were not without any effect. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Just at this moment, a series of buzzing sounds similar to teleportation flickers suddenly rang out in the midair a dozen meters away. A human inquisitor whose power armor shell was scarred and even missing an arm, and a short-haired youth covered in blood, were teleported to the ground by a blue-skinned demon-like mutant at all costs. And the three, who had just seen the light of day again, saw Primarch Rorschach and Tyberos who were fiercely fighting the bloodthirster greater demon in front of them at a glance. In the next second, Peter Parker, who had directly snatched the chainsword from Frank's one-armed palm, suddenly leapt up from the ground. "Hey, greater demon, this is, for Mr. Scott." The other party, whose eyes were bloodshot and roaring angrily, flew across the midair at high speed. And forcibly stabbed the roaring chainsword into the depths of the bloodthirster greater demon's neck. And Primarch Rorschach and Tyberos, who instantly seized this beheading opportunity, once again brandished the melee weapons in their palms. They respectively severed the head of this bloodthirster greater demon and the opponent's chaos demon body covered with a large number of wounds. Thump. When the remaining body of the bloodthirster greater demon in front of them crashed to the ground. After the terrifying corpse, along with the hideous head, quickly disappeared into thin air. Primarch Rorschach and Tyberos, whose magnetic boots heavily trampled the ground, subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. They only had time to turn their heads and take a look at the short-haired youth and the one-armed Frank who were panting heavily but slightly dazed. Then, the two drove the scarred power armor without looking back, turned their direction, and launched a swift charge towards Kabanda, the bloodthirster, whose combat power and killing aura were even more terrifying. Rumble. On another battlefield where the flames of war were raging, a large number of Lehman Russ tanks were either overturned on the ground by terrifying brute force, or split in two from the middle by the bloodthirster's great axe. The miserable corpses of countless Astartes and superheroes from various companies were scattered evenly around the battlefield in a fragmented state, and it was even difficult to piece together a complete body in a short period of time. At this moment, the super-large Centurion Iron Man armor, which was 15 meters tall, slowly knelt down on the ground. The hard armor surface was covered with countless terrifying chop marks, and a large number of exposed internal mechanical structures were blooming countless sparks and explosions outwards. Even many weapon combination components that were flying around had lost their original offensive function and had only become the basic structure supporting the super-large Centurion from not completely falling to the ground. In fact, if it weren't for Thor, who was wrapped in the wrath of thunder and re-attacked, successfully intervening in the previous battle. Then not long ago, Tony, who was personally controlling the super-large Centurion Iron Man armor, would have been completely torn into countless flying mechanical fragments by Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster. Rumble, along with the terrifying thunderous sound from the dark night sky above. One after another, the dazzling lightning serpents that were constantly summoned by Thor, the thunder god, with an angry expression, repeatedly struck the massive body of Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster. Ragnar Blackmane, wielding the Murkai's Howl Warhammer, was also directly facing Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster, engaging in a more intense weapon clash with the precise cooperation of a large number of battle brothers. But even though the Chaos Portal had been accidentally destroyed, Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster, who had completely lost the attention of Khorne and the Continuous Blessing, was also one of the most powerful Bloodthirster greater demons among countless Chaos greater demons. Every time the opponent, who kept making low and grim smiles in his mouth, waved the Bloodthirster's great axe in his palm, several or even a dozen Astartes who did not have time to dodge would become the souls under the axe of the Bloodthirster greater demon. And when countless severed limbs, flesh and blood, and armor fragments were flying horizontally, Ragnar Blackmane, whose facial expression became more and more ferocious, chose to let half of his body be forcibly chopped into by the Bloodthirster's great axe as the price. Forcibly restricting Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster's offensive methods, while also repeatedly blasting the Murkai's Howl Warhammer on the opponent's chest. In an instant, dozens of Space Wolves brothers and Astartes, whose armor shells were scarred, also instantly pounced forward. They firmly bound Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster's thick limbs that were moving back and forth at the cost of being crushed to death at any time, and also completely inserted the melee weapons in their palms into the opponent's massive body. Boom! In the next second, just as Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster, who was roaring angrily, was planning to flap his blood-red wings located behind his spine, forcibly breaking free from all the restraints and injuries on his massive body. Mjolnir, help me smash it. Thor, the thunder god, whose tall body suddenly leapt up from the ground, raised the lightning-entwined Mjolnir high above his blood-covered head, and then heavily smashed it down on the center of Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster's massive head. Ah! At this moment, Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster, who could not help but let out a painful roar, had most of his head shattered in an instant, and countless brains, flesh, blood, and bones became chaos warp energy that splashed everywhere. However, the opponent, who had clearly suffered serious injuries, still did not completely fall down. Instead, because of the constant stimulation of severe pain, a more powerful physical force suddenly burst out from inside the massive body. Pung, pung, pung. Those Astartes who were trying to restrain Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster's thick limbs were instantly blasted outwards, and everyone even flew out a long distance of at least hundreds of meters before crashing heavily on the tragic battlefield that was piled with countless corpses everywhere. Ka'Bandha, in the blink of an eye, along with an angry roar that resounded throughout the battlefield, a blood scythe that had been completely rotated into a green light wheel quickly slashed across the mid-air and forcibly inserted into the back of Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster's wide spine. In the next second, the buzzing Dawnbreaker Warhammer, as if it was wrapped in an extremely terrifying whistling sound, heavily smashed down on Ka'Bandha the Bloodthirster's massive body. Get back to the warp space for me. Rumble, accompanied by a sudden deafening roar that echoed all around. Visible waves of terrifying shockwaves violently erupted from the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, tightly gripped in Primarch Rock's hands. "It's you, you damned insect!" Exclamation mark quote. Cabana, the bloodthirster accurately struck by the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, abruptly raised its head and let out a deafening roar. Its entire massive body was forcefully hammered to the ground by the sudden, terrifying force. In the next second, the blood-soaked, towering figure of Wulfen Roche, bearing grievous wounds, gritted his teeth and broke free from the grip of the Khorne great axe. He desperately propelled his increasingly battered power armor forward. The Breaker Warhammer, gripped tightly in his palm, crackled with strands of coiling lightning. It crashed down heavily on the already unhealed, massive head of the bloodthirster Cabana. Crackle. At the same time, Thor, the god of thunder, whose widened eyes seemed to unleash a glimmer of brilliant lightning, leapt forward violently. Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, constantly emitting even more electric light, fell like a terrifying heavenly judgment. With unparalleled speed and ferocity, the pincer-shaped head of the Breaker Warhammer was driven deep into the bloodthirster Cabana's massive skull like a nail. Crack! The bloodthirster Cabana's massive head abruptly exploded outward, scattering large amounts of chaotic flesh and bone fragments. Even the remaining portion of its head was completely submerged in a torrent of terrifying lightning that erupted violently. Boom! Immediately afterward, after Primarch Roche once again forcefully swung the Dawnbreaker Warhammer and slammed it down on the opponent's massive head. The previously invincible bloodthirster Cabana was instantly and utterly annihilated by the three renowned and powerful Warhammers, its soul silently rolling back into the depths of the warp. Thump! At this moment, Primarch Roche, panting heavily, slammed the Dawnbreaker Warhammer heavily onto the ground. The heavy hammerhead directly created a concave area filled with viscous blood. He stared at the remains of the Chaos Demon's corpse, which were rapidly dissipating within his line of sight. Then, he turned his gaze to Thor, the god of thunder, whose expression had also relaxed considerably, and Wulfen Roche, whose face was covered in blood. Without much hesitation, Primarch Roche flipped over a ceramite gauntlet. He retrieved two panaceas from the storage space behind his power pack and threw them towards the two people in front of him. Thor, the god of thunder, holding Mjolnir, casually caught one of the panaceas but turned his head and handed it to Wulfen Roche standing beside him. Wulfen Roche, baring his teeth, unceremoniously stuffed both panaceas into his mouth. "Come on, brothers, there are still a lot of chaos demons that haven't been cleaned up yet. If we continue to delay, I'm afraid those surviving comrades will also run into trouble." At this moment, Primarch Roche, scanning the battlefield situation, once again tightly gripped the Bloodletter and the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, which were embedded deep in the ground. Without turning his head, he said in a deep voice to Wulfen Roche, whose injuries were rapidly improving, and Thor, the god of thunder, whose expression was solemn. The other two followed behind Primarch Roche without hesitation. The three quickly launched wave after wave of murderous charges across the still incredibly lively and chaotic battlefield. Of course, with the successive defeats of the two Khorne greater demons. The morale and combat power of the Chaos Demons, which had completely collapsed, were completely submerged in the encirclement formed by numerous Astartes and mortal warriors under the baptism of heavy fire and the compression and encirclement of countless heavy vehicles, as well as the light lance array of the three sky cruisers that came to the battlefield. Soon after, when the first ray of cold light from the dawn sun shone obliquely onto the cruel battlefield covered with corpses, everyone, their faces filled with exhaustion, temporarily stopped any work at hand. They subconsciously let out a heavy sigh that drifted with the wind in the direction of the rising sun. This difficult war against the second Chaos incursion was once again won with the sacrifice of countless Astartes and mortal heroes. However, the price paid by the human side was also a very alarming number. Apart from the mobile hive city that was sacrificed and at least 1 million civilians inside, the Imperial Guard alone lost more than 80,000 mortal warriors. More than a dozen infantry regiments were almost completely wiped out, and even the unit numbers could not be completely preserved. Even after Iron Man David finished counting the names of all the surviving personnel in the 8 stormtrooper companies, he found that there were only less than 5 companies left. It should be known that these stormtroopers were originally reserve mortal recruits who were about to become Astartes, and were invaluable elite seeds. As for weapons and vehicles, of the 1,100 Leman Russ tanks and land raiders that were continuously put into the battlefield, a total of about 900 were destroyed. Only 1 in 10 of the 33 Thunderhawk transport aircraft flight formations in the European region survived. A large number of well-trained and experienced pilots were transformed from living people into cold, hard Imperial honor medals made of vibranium. However, compared with this, the number of deaths and sacrifices of the Astartes companies may be even more alarming. Within the 3 companies of the Lamenter's Great Company, apart from the 3rd company that was corrupted by chaos, almost half of the Astartes in the 1st and 2nd companies were killed or wounded. If it weren't for the powerful effect of the panacea, even more Astartes would have needed to enter dreadnoughts to survive. The Raven Guard Great Company had 2 companies, with only about 15 casualties. This was due to the Raven Guard's own combat style and elusive battlefield tactics, which successfully reduced the number of casualties. 3 companies of the Flesh-Tearers Great Company were mobilized this time. 2 of them were basically wiped out, and there were countless wounded in the remaining company. This also led to Captain Tiberius overturning several tables on the spot when he learned of the specific situation before barely calming his anger. As for the 20 or so Wolfen brought by Wolfen Roche and the dozens of battle brothers from the Space Wolves, because these guys chose to directly confront the Bloodthirster Cabana's attack, only 3 Wolfen and 11 Space Wolves survived. And this was because those superheroes from the Ordo Malleus sacrificed their own lives, successfully attracting part of the Chaos Demon's attention. Otherwise, the Astartes fighting alongside Wolfen Roche probably wouldn't have survived even one. In addition, the superheroes of the Ordo Malleus can also be said to have suffered considerable losses. Of the 50 or so people who came to participate in the war, only 9 survived until the end of the war. In response, Tony, who was somewhat in a state of post-war stress, hysterically roared at Primarch Roche and others for a long time. He repeatedly muttered that he needed to cover the empty coffins of more than 40 superheroes, whose bodies could not be found, with double-headed eagle banners. Then personally send death notices and monetary compensation to the families who lost their relatives and friends. Finally, Tony, who couldn't help but hug Primarch Roche and Thor, the god of thunder, and almost cried out, gradually calmed down. His expression became more and more firm, and he vowed never to let similar situations happen again. He would completely arm all mankind with all his wisdom and super technology, and would not rest until death. It was just after the end of the Second Native Chaos War. Located in the atmospheric dissipation layer about 3,000 kilometers above the entire battlefield, a blond man with a very burly and strong physique, wearing a set of yellow and black hero uniforms, watched the entire process of this fierce war intently. And when the intense solar radiation, without any obstruction or hindrance, shone on his almost perfect tall body, a black belt inlaid with the letter S suddenly began to reflect a more dazzling metallic luster. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. In an instant, the blond man, who stretched out his thick arms and shook his broad shoulders a few times, seemed to let out a fleeting murmur. He suddenly turned his tall figure. He suddenly flew at a terrifying speed that was difficult for the naked eye or any mechanical creation to capture, towards the other end of the vast Earth, completely disappearing into the edge of the atmosphere. Currently, no one knows where this blond man came from, or whether he is a friend or foe. But one thing is certain. If the recently concluded Chaos Invasion War had completely plunged the human side into a disadvantage, then this blond man would most likely choose to help. However, for the billions of people on native Terra or the Primarch Rogel Dorn, whether this is a blessing or a curse is really hard to say. The vast nation of mutants. Inside the ancient Winter Palace in the capital city, Magneto Max, whose overall appearance has now returned from old age to middle age, solemnly closed the detailed intelligence file on the European battlefield. Frowning, He first tapped the metal armrest of the floating wheelchair lightly with one hand. Then, he nodded to Mystique, who was standing aside, to open the tightly closed door of the room not far away. Da. Soon after, a lithe and vigorous body wrapped in officer's uniform strode purposefully into the room. The other party first nodded to Mystique with a stern expression, and then immediately said in a deep voice towards Magneto Max. "Elder, Commander-in-Chief of the X-Men Patrol Team, Major General Jean Grey, reporting to you. Comrade Jean, this is not a national mission, but an independent private meeting, you don't have to be so restrained." At this moment, Magneto Max said to the other party in a gentle tone. After the middle-aged female general named Jean Grey nodded emphatically. She said to Magneto Max without any hesitation. "Elder, I already knew in advance what you called me here for. Comrade Scott sacrificed himself on the battlefield, didn't he?" As soon as the other party's voice fell, Magneto Max subconsciously raised his hand and groped for the position of his temples. Afterwards, he shook his head with a wry smile and said, "Tisk, Comrade Jean, why do you still have the same problem as Charles in the past? I can only say that you are worthy of being his student. Well, since you have read my mind through your telepathic ability, then I won't hide it from you. Your ex-husband, Cyclops Scott, sacrificed himself at the cost of his life, completely destroying the bloody altar and teleportation gate of those invading demons before his death, laying the foundation for the final victory of the entire battle. In this regard, the Primarch of the Empire solemnly thanked Comrade Scott for all his contributions, and also gave us a large amount of Imperial technology as compensation. I am looking for you because you are Comrade Scott's former wife. I would like to ask you if you have any suggestions or requirements before the entire state funeral is held." At this moment, Jean Grey, whose facial expression seemed to have never changed, said in a flat tone, "Elder, I don't have any special suggestions or any requirements. Just follow the country's past rules. In addition, I actually don't have much affection with Scott anymore. He is now fighting to the death for the benefit of the mutants and the people, and to protect mankind. It is also his greatest honor in this life. This is all I want to express to you." At this moment, Magneto Max nodded solemnly after hearing Jean Grey's words. But in the next second, the other party suddenly stared at the female general in front of him and asked softly, "Comrade Jean, how are your emotions recently? Are they still stable?" "Elder, I know what questions you want to ask me. There is no need to beat around the bush so much. What I can tell you now is that the restrained power is safely staying inside my body without any abnormalities or signs of awakening, and I can also mobilize a small part of it with the tenacious will that I have honed over the years. So, if mankind encounters powerful invading enemies that ordinary soldiers and Astartes companies cannot handle next time, you better let me go once." As soon as Jean Grey's words fell, Magneto Max, who raised his eyebrows slightly, couldn't help but take a deep breath. He was silent for a while. Then he continued to communicate with Jean Grey in front of him with a smile on his face. Soon after Jean Grey, who was always stern and seemed to have no emotional fluctuations, turned and left the room. Mystique, who had closed the door again, quickly walked to Magneto Max's side. The other party hesitated obviously, but still said, "Max, why did you suddenly summon her? Is it really just because of Comrade Scott's unfortunate sacrifice? I just want to confirm once again whether the mental barrier set up by our old friend Charles at the cost of his life can still work. After all, that is a terrifying force that almost destroyed the entire Earth and even the solar system." Magneto Max, who slowly closed his eyes, said in a low voice. Mystique seemed to have heard about this for a long time. She didn't show any surprise at all, but continued, "Max, do we need to inform the Empire about this in advance? If the Primarch accidentally finds out about this, Raven, this is the last foundation of our mutant race. Even if someone wants to seize this terrifying power that far exceeds the Omega mutant level, it is not that simple. I believe the Primarch himself will not have any covetous intentions, but he can only represent his Terra Star Realm Legion, not the more powerful human empire itself. Moreover, this terrifying power, which is said to come from the depths of the universe, is too dangerous. People who have not personally felt it cannot understand it at all. I don't think the Primarch and the Empire can handle it cleanly alone. Max, you never seem to have told me what exactly this terrifying power is and what it represents. Raven, that's actually because I don't know too many truths either. The only thing I know now is a name that Charles left me before he died. The Phoenix Force. Upon the sun-drenched European battlefield. Everywhere one looked, there were only rising wisps of smoke from ruins and broken walls. Or the skeletal remains of humans intertwined and fused with wrecked vehicles. Automatic servo robots, organized into combat squads, used extremely precise manipulation. They continuously gathered the remains of fallen warriors from everything around, while also spraying large quantities of holy water, created by the Emperor's faithful and local clergy, to purify the vast swaths of land contaminated by chaos flesh. At the same time, apothecaries and tech sergeants from various Astartes companies, assisted by many mortal warriors, were rapidly collecting usable gene seeds and power armor. And on the outermost perimeter of the battlefield, across the ground for hundreds of kilometers, dense, metallic prefab buildings had been rapidly constructed. Groups of X-Men patrol squads from mutant nations took on the security duties for the entire area. More relief supplies and manpower support from the Asian region were arriving to help relocate mobile hive cities to safer areas as quickly as possible. Looking out, numerous triage stations, cremation sites, salvage depots for damaged equipment, and psychic purification centers were distributed in an orderly, uniform fashion across every visible area. And within one of these, outwardly named a psychic purification center, but in reality a sealed room specifically for detecting chaos corruption, a heated exchange was ongoing. Probationary Inquisitor Peter Parker, do you currently feel an inner sense of agitation and anger? Do you have dark thoughts of wanting to continue killing, or to destroy everything? A deep, slow male voice inquired. Esteemed sirs, this is the 77th time you've asked me these damned questions. Do you think I should or shouldn't feel anger and agitation? I've already safely passed the double test of drinking holy water and applying the Emperor's blood, and no adverse reactions have been found on my body. Why are you still forcibly detaining me? Peter Parker, his hands temporarily restrained by a pair of superpower dampening cuffs, sat on a metal chair. His expression was indifferent as he rapidly spoke to the several figures not far away. You should have released me 18 hours ago. I've told you repeatedly, when we were teleported out of the lower levels of the mobile hive city by our mutant comrades, surrounded by a large number of supernatural monsters, that Black Uncle called Blade was chasing after the mastermind behind this chaos incursion alone. We stumbled upon a chaos worshipper who looked like an ancient witch. We believe she caused all the current losses. Your primary task now is to quickly assemble a combat-capable tracking squad to support the lone Black Uncle and help him eliminate the Chaos Worshipper, but why won't you believe me? However, at that moment, just as Peter Parker's urgent words trailed off, Hawkeye, bearing a large metal bow on his back and wearing a black stealth suit, suddenly raised a hand to stop the interrogators beside him. He took a deep breath and earnestly said to Peter Parker, Esteemed Probationary Inquisitor, it's not that our entire intelligence division is deliberately making things difficult for you, but that the nature of your group's actions and experiences exceeds the boundaries of rational imagination. You must understand, nearly 1 million ordinary citizens and an entire company of Astartes couldn't resist this chaos corruption. How exactly did you few manage it? Special superpowers or mutant abilities? Not to mention that you personally dealt a near-fatal blow to a great unclean one with a chainsword. While we are immensely grateful for your heroic actions, do you know that roughly several thousand people were already near the point of corruption and depravity the moment they saw the great unclean one? If a battlefield commander who had experienced the first Chaos War hadn't made a decisive sacrifice, the consequences would have been unimaginable. But what does that have to do with our experiences? I've told you countless times, I don't know what happened either, but Instructor Frank and those mutant friends of mine were completely unaffected by chaos corruption. Mr. Scott chose to sacrifice himself to destroy the Hive City altar because he was severely injured and unable to move, willingly buying us more time to escape. Sirs, do you realize that for every second you waste here with me, that Chaos worshipper who escaped from underground gains a greater chance of survival? Do you want to see another Chaos incursion occur? At this moment, Peter Parker, his facial expression growing increasingly anxious, couldn't help but abruptly stand up from the metal chair. Several interrogators standing around Hawkeye swiftly raised the laser rifles and bolters in their hands, firmly targeting Peter Parker's head. Just as Hawkeye, frowning deeply, was about to order the interrogators to lower their weapons and temporarily ease the somewhat tense atmosphere between them. Boom! The metal door on one side of the sealed room violently burst inward and narrowly grazed the scalps of several interrogators before embedding itself deep into the metal wall. The next second, Inquisitor Frank, wearing mortal power armor, continuously moved his newly installed vibranium mechanical arm on his stump. He entered the brightly lit room expressionlessly. Inquisitor Frank, are you planning a rebellion? Do you know where you are? Do you know what you're doing? Hawkeye, gripping his metal bow behind his back, stared intently at Inquisitor Frank in front of him, sternly shouting at him. However, at this moment, Inquisitor Frank first lowered his head to look at Peter Parker, whose face was breaking into a smile. Then, he calmly said to Hawkeye and the others, who were vigilantly on guard. So, do you assassins know what you are doing? Only we Inquisitors judge others, and no Inquisitor is judged by others. Furthermore, please address me as Grand Inquisitor. I, whose authority now far exceeds yours, will follow the orders of Lord Primarch and come to take away the first hero in our inquisitorial ranks, Peter Parker. The next moment, Grand Inquisitor Frank, seemingly disregarding Hawkeye and the others' unpleasant expressions, strode forward, propelled by his mortal power armor. He extended a ceramite hand, snapped the superpower dampening cuffs restraining Peter Parker, and then gazed at the latter's youthful face, asking in a deep voice. Identification number 0099, Probationary Inquisitor Peter Parker, are you willing to dedicate everything to protecting all of humanity? Hearing his instructor's words, Peter Parker quickly suppressed all the smiles on his face. He lowered his head slightly in thought. Then, he suddenly raised his head and solemnly said, I am willing. Probationary Inquisitor Peter Parker, are you willing to judge all heretics and Xenos for the sake of Lord Primarch and the Imperium of Man, even if it means fighting to the death? I am willing. Probationary Inquisitor Peter Parker, I, Grand Inquisitor Frank Castle, hereby officially declare that you have successfully been promoted to a fully fledged Inquisitor. Now, according to Lord Primarch's orders, you will personally lead a squad of Astartes from the Raven Guard to track down and kill that chaos-worshipping ancient witch. Are you willing to accept this incredibly difficult mission? I am willing. Hee, instructor, watch me. I'm going to personally wring her head off and use it as a bowl, and her limbs, cough cough cough, don't move. I haven't been corrupted by chaos, that was just a little joke. Inside the Twin Islands base's main hall, Primarch Roche and Iron Man David were rapidly processing a large number of documents, while simultaneously approving various matters through the communication network. Although, according to the war damage statistics compiled so far, the losses on Terra this time can be said to be quite severe. However, heroic figures like Hero Judge Peter Parker and Armored Brigade Commander Colonel Zemo have become great existences capable of inspiring more mortals. After all, these mortals who can directly engage in combat with the great demons of chaos, survive, and remain uncorrupted. Even in the Warhammer universe, they are rare existences. As for the fact that they and the vast majority of mortal warriors have not been corrupted by chaos, Primarch Roche suspects that the Emperor intervened on a large scale to provide protection. However, when more detailed conversation records were placed before him, he wondered if some powerful unknown existences in the Terra had also intervened. You must know that the most troublesome aspect of chaos is the imperceptible corruption and fall, which can subtly distort one's perception of everything in the outside world. Even gene seed primarchs like themselves sometimes find it difficult to resist for too long, at least, the demon Primarch Fulgrim is a vivid example. But what if those powerful existences in the Terra have learned about the invasion of chaos through several chaos wars and have even begun to develop thoughts of defense and counterattack? Primarch Roche did not believe that the Emperor, who arrived before the Chaos Gods, did not engage in any guidance or transactions behind the scenes of Terra. Doing nothing is not in line with the style of this old wise man. Unfortunately, he was never able to communicate with the Emperor to a certain extent, and naturally could not know what the other party had done. Of course, all of this is undoubtedly good news worth exploring in depth for Primarch Roche. That is, the various local power players on Terra may hate the invasion of the Chaos Gods even more than he does. After all, those bad guys who try to reach into other people's bowls will be attacked by other groups. Therefore, Primarch Roche, who inadvertently figured out this issue, has a more optimistic perspective on the serious losses currently suffered. He even began, with the assistance of Iron Man David and others, gradually unfolded a larger-scale follow-up plan and design deduction for the entire Terra. Currently, the Legion's secret conquest of Terra has actually entered the mid to late stage of gradual disclosure. Because with the invasion of an alien species and 2 consecutive Chaos Wars, whether it is the mutant nation, or the European and Asian regions, they have successively joined the military system mainly based on the Legion due to the huge external threat. Even the African region only has Wakanda, which is heavily surrounded by the Intelligent Control Legion. Other than that, all places are firmly under the control of the Legion. As for the Americas, Iron Man David is giving face to the heroes of the Revenge Tribunal. Has been carrying out a state of continuous free-range farming in this area. It only dispatched a large number of intelligence personnel to infiltrate and buy off the upper echelons of those countries. Even the Raven Guard, who are best at inciting civilian uprisings, only casually threw 2 unlucky champions over there. However, next, for the final unification of the entire Terra, Iron Man David will accelerate the development progress of many things according to Primarch Roche's orders and completely control the entire Terra. If necessary, a devastating large-scale war is also one of the options. Once the task of unifying Terra is accomplished, then the 5 major war zone plan that Primarch Roche and the others are discussing will gradually go online. The current plan is that the Asian War Zone will be mainly responsible for the manufacture and maintenance of large weapons and equipment, such as space warships, flying vehicles, and ground vehicles, and other similar large and medium-sized projects. The European War Zone will be mainly responsible for the Homeland Defense Forces, which can be renamed the Astra Militarum at any time, recruiting and training more mortal warriors from all over the world, as well as recruits who may become Astartes. The African War Zone will be mainly responsible for providing a large number of minerals and food to other war zones, and may also concurrently manufacture light weapons and even Vibranium series equipment. As for the American War Zone, under the leadership of Redditus, gathers scientists recruited from all over the world to be responsible for the research and upgrading of Imperial technology and even alien technology. Or simply adapt to local conditions and, under the leadership of Bishop Pietro, become a large diocese of the local ecclesiarchy. Of course, at present, this is just a very rough and rudimentary basic framework. The ideal state is to completely transform Terra into a special system that only serves the war itself. Therefore, many of the details are being heavily reduced or increased by everyone, and the functions responsible for each war zone may be completely different in the future. The reason why Primarch Roche and others came up with such an architecture. It is also to prevent Terra from redeveloping into countries within countries that are not under the control of the Legion due to the problem of overconcentration of the internal industrial chain after Terra is truly unified. But just like Iron Man David, who has personally experienced the Golden Age and the Dark Age, evaluated the 5 major war zone system. Unless everyone in each war zone in the future is connected to a super-planetary network, and is completely monitored and managed by a super-artificial intelligence that fully complies with the principles of fairness and justice. Otherwise, it will only take 100 years. The 5 major war zones becoming countries within countries again is only a matter of time. In this regard, the wise and foolish Rorschach casually suggested. After Terra is unified, they can immediately prepare to launch a series of interstellar colonization plans and expeditionary actions to the more distant depths of the universe. Use this method to reduce internal conflicts and the consumption of large amounts of resources on Terra. Encipher Roche, who is far away in Wakanda watching the Black Uncles baring their teeth back and forth, put forward an even more vicious suggestion. He believes that if the people of Terra ultimately cannot adapt to the ruling methods of the human empire, even when the situation develops to the point where a large number of people want to rely on countries within countries to incite rebellions, then directly carry out a complete depopulation plan. Anyway, countless more loyal people on the real Terra are willing to pay any price to live here. However, before Primarch Roche, who was quietly listening, could refute this, Wolf Roche suddenly said in a sarcastic tone, "If Cypher Roche is willing to independently bear the kind greetings from the Emperor himself, then after Terra is unified, they can implement this plan according to the other party's vicious ideas." In the end, Primarch Roche, with a slight frown, forcibly cut off their network communication with everyone before Wolf Roche and Cypher Roche completely quarreled. After Primarch Roche temporarily stopped Iron Man David, who was sitting aside, from trying to persuade him, his tall body wearing the volcano ring leaned against the metal chair and fell into deep thought. Primarch Roche inadvertently remembered the words spoken by an elderly man at that secret meeting when Zheng Xian, the director of the Shield, introduced him to the leaders of the Asian region. That is, the problem of development can only be truly solved in development. Instead of forcibly intervening in some way according to some preconceived notions that have not yet occurred. Often, the more you don't want it to develop in a certain direction, the more the outcome will be the answer you least want to get. Forget it, I'll leave this kind of thing to the Ultramarines who are better at management in the future, or Gilliman himself to worry about. If it really doesn't work, when I have time, I'll get the clone Fulgrim from Trazyn the Infinite and let my Primarch brother with his super social charm govern all the problems of Terra. At this moment, Primarch Roche, who couldn't help but sigh, thought silently with a headache. The cold, drizzling rain lingered over the bustling city for days. It scattered down upon the passing crowds and the messy streets. Inside New York, which had successfully been renamed Gotham, the overall public security situation was becoming increasingly unbearable. To be precise, the public security situation across the entire North American continent was rapidly deteriorating. As the Primarch's legions gradually deepened their control over other regions, large numbers of the wealthy elite, and even freedom-loving citizens unwilling to live under stable rule, flooded into the North American region. However, countless supervillains escaping the pursuit of the Astartes companies also seemed to have found a truly lawless land. Not to mention, there were also the local bad guys. Therefore, even with more superheroes either acting alone to uphold justice, or choosing to join the Avenger Judicators, gaining the best training and equipment, it was difficult to completely suppress the soaring crime rate and violent incidents year after year. Thump, thump, thump. At this moment, a tall figure in a white combat suit, with a heavy cape dragging on the damp ground, crouched on the very top of a skyscraper. His face, completely covered by a white bandage mask, quietly overlooked the vast city streets of Gotham. The countless ongoing crimes and the ceaseless wail of police sirens echoed repeatedly in his incredibly sharp ears. It also made him subconsciously tighten his grip on the crescent-shaped throwing weapon in his palm. The next second, this unnamed superhero leapt down from the top of the skyscraper. A height of several hundred meters was merely a routine warm-up exercise for him. Boom! The slowing effect from the heavy cape and his own immense strength allowed this unnamed hero, who chose to fight alone, to successfully land deep within a chaotic and dirty alley street. Whoosh! 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 He swiftly flicked one hand forward, and the crescent-shaped throwing weapon had already sliced through the air. It heavily embedded itself in the back of the large thug who was attempting to rob a passing woman. However, just as the unnamed hero was about to step forward and lean down to check on the innocent woman's condition. A colder smile flickered across the corners of the innocent woman's lips. The next moment, a large amount of green mist, enough to poison large creatures, suddenly sprayed out from one of her fair hands towards the unnamed hero. Even though the unnamed hero reacted incredibly quickly, he still accidentally inhaled some of the toxic mist. His entire large body instantly stumbled backward, eventually collapsing onto the ground. At the same time, the thug's corpse, which should have been pinned to the alley wall by the crescent dart, and the innocent woman stood together with sinister grins, beginning to embrace and deeply kiss each other. Clearly, they were not just simple thugs and passers-by, but a pair of unnamed villain partners attempting to hunt superheroes to gain notoriety. Tap, tap, tap. But just then, a tall figure wearing heavy power armor with ceramite plating, and wrapped in wisps of black shadow from head to toe, silently appeared behind that pair of unnamed villain partners. Rip. Two power claws, glowing with a pale blue disintegration field, had already deeply pierced into the two incredibly fragile human bodies. And after the broken corpses, easily torn apart by the power claws, hit the ground heavily, and the large amount of hot blood was washed away by the cold rain. This tall figure in power armor slowly moved his magnetic boots, walking towards the unnamed hero who was still gasping violently, sprawled on the dirty ground. Target locked. Moon Knight, Mark Spector, you possess a strong obsession with seeking justice and eradicating evil. You belong to our Raven Guard. Welcome to the Astartes Legion. As soon as the words fell, the shadow captain from the Raven Guard, driving his power armor, leaned down slightly, extending a ceramite hand towards the Moon Knight, who was struggling to lift his head. And the other party, who was enduring the repeated torment of the terrifying toxin, hesitated for a moment, but still extended his trembling hand and clasped it tightly with the others. At the same time, various similar recruitment situations were widely unfolding across the entire chaotic North American region. The Raven Guard Great Company, which had received the Primarch's order to expand the ranks with new recruits, were more inclined to choose those superheroes who harbored a deep hatred for evil itself, or mortals who never compromised in the face of evil. And the other Astartes great companies also had their own methods and ways of recruiting more new recruits. For example, in the Asian region, the heartland of Japan, on a training ground with an incredibly strict level of security, hundreds of human berserkers, with bulging muscles all over their bodies and surging blood energy, were launching continuous, frenzied attacks towards a massive, unarmed figure. Even though the massive body of the other party, clad in ancient Terminator armor, remained completely motionless. But that pale, deathly face, and the occasional low laughter, still revealed Captain Tiberius's inner joy. He had just received permission from the Primarch to create Flesh Tears Astartes' new blood from human berserkers. As long as there were enough Flesh Tears gene seeds, then Flesh Tears Astartes, whose combat strength was far greater than in the past, could be said to be continuously produced. And in the Terran Defense Force garrisons located in the European region, the Lamenters, one by one, leaning their power armor against heavy vehicles, were engaging in enthusiastic exchanges with the surrounding mortal soldiers, with a very friendly atmosphere. On the training ground not far away, mortal soldiers with incredibly excited expressions were participating in all-out martial arts competitions. Because the legendary Astartes companies had decided to recruit more new recruits from within the Terran Defense Force, everyone had a chance to become a tall and mighty Astartes. Even if the final surgical process was unsuccessful, they could still join the stormtrooper companies wearing auxiliary power armor. As for those stormtroopers who already possessed the conditions to become Astartes, they were currently engaging in more intense discussions with the Great Deceiver Lucas regarding the icy environment and flora and fauna on the planet Fenris. If there were no unexpected circumstances, these 5 companies of stormtroopers would arrive within the Fang, officially embarking on the long road to becoming a space wolf. Due to the incredibly unique Canis helix of the space wolves, The process of creating new recruits must be located on Fenris, otherwise, the chance of becoming an Astartes, while not non-existent, was very small. In addition, the Black Templars, who only had 20 to 30 gene seeds, set off for the areas controlled by the Imperial cult in the Asian region. They intended to find some local believers who were incredibly devout to the Emperor, to barely increase their new recruit numbers. And the White Scars, who had no gene seed reserves at all, could only turn their frustration into motivation. Daily pestering Raditus to create a faster and stronger hoverbike vehicle for them. As for the Blood Ravens' great company, their librarians were on their way to Kamar Taj. Strange's mage force might just give the Blood Ravens a huge surprise. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.